Namaste. Welcome to another episode of Navimas podcast. So today, as we can see, we have Dr. Bijeet Prasantha, the author of Hindu Messiah and Hindu genocides. Okay. So today we are not having him as author of the book, but we are going to discuss a specific problem that we had discussed privately, and we thought let's discuss this to all the audience with us. I think this is something which us as individuals and as Hindus, as practicing Hindus, as Sanatanis, need to discuss and understand what ails Hindu society and how we can resurrect it. So, with that concept in mind, we had named this podcast Rekindling Dharma, the Hindu way to a resilient future. We all want our futures to be bright, our futures to be as sunlit as the morning sun. So, with this regard, okay, so before we discuss our ideas, how to rekindle Dharma, the Hindu way to resistance, give me 5 minutes to give a specific solution or a way to actually solve the problem. So, if you can see here in the book, we have rearming Hinduism, the intellectual pursuit to actually reinforce and learn and rekindle the dharmic way of resistance, the spiritual way of resistance. We have this book, Hindu Messiah and Hindu genocides. This talks about the historic events which caused immense harm and loss of life and loss of heritage of Hindus. This is also a part of intellectual resurrection in terms of documenting and preserving the records of the atrocities committed on Hindus by the invaders. And the third, we have being Hindu. Let me just take this out. We have being Hindu, a political history from Aditya Chula to Narendra Modi. So this is the point where both of them we actually lack in many ways. But the political Hindu or the political Hindutva, which was in its infancy when Bankim Chandra Chatterjee wrote Vande Mataram, when the revolutionaries of from Lala Lajpat Rai to Bhagavad Tilak to Khudiram and to Netaji Subhas and any other luminaries who were fighting for India's freedom, for Bharat's freedom, and they imagined the freedom from the Vande Mataram song from Anand Math, and that journey ended in 1947 when Bharat became a communist state in political thought and in terms of administration and the way it functioned for over till now today. Yes. So we are going to talk about today the intellectual pursuit, which we will discuss this, and also we will touch upon the political Hindutva aspect of the resurrection of dharmic ways of life. So, Bijidda, Namaste, Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.
Namaste, Vande Mataram.
So, yes, so we had discussed this in our conversation. So let's take this out and discuss this with our audience. So tell me how you plan to rekindle dharma.
Right. Right. So, in the context of this topic, first we are going to discuss all the problems that Hinduism or Hindu Dharma and its followers are having in the subcontinent as well as in the broader geopolitical context. And after we lay out the problems, it will be easier to sort of find the answers, right? As it goes, it is always a difficult thing to ask a question, right? Once you ask the right question, answer most of the time are pretty much easier. Okay. Um, so in this context, we are first going to discuss the problems, and then in the second half, we are going to discuss the solutions. And we have pretty good solutions that we already have in our existing shastras. We're just going to pick them up in the context of these issues and problems, and to sort of so that we can discuss the, like, we don't need to invent anything new. Probably some part we are going to keep near the end that we need to invent, but most of the solutions, because Hindus have gone through a 1,000-year long jati vidvans, um, we already have developed a large number of mechanisms to sort of cope, and we are just going to reinvent and rediscuss those things in this context of our current socio-political or geopolitical issues. So the first problem that Hindus are having, um, or Hindu Dharma and the principle itself is probably having right now in the context of Abrahamism, is that tyranny of the unconscious. Right? I think in the podcast yesterday, you guys were talking about tyranny of low expectations. Hindu Dharma don't have
Poverty,
any
poverty of aspirations.
poverty of aspirations and tyranny of low expectations, as was
Hmm.
discussed by the
MS.
yeah, by the speaker. Here, the first point I am trying to discuss is tyranny of the unconscious, and what is that? Now, because Hindu Dharma is a universal Dharma, it does not have a otherizing prospect. It does not otherize or kafirize human being. It does not divide or create vertical split in humanity. So to say, in terms of believer and non-believer, or mumin or kafir, these kind of Abrahamic sort of us and them otherization doctrines. So this universal nature of Hinduism in the political context has a problem, right? Because it generates the illusion of harmony, tolerance, and goodwill, right? And we pretty much are, like, we consider that the issues that we are have, like, the sort of Hindu Dharma, the way it is interpreted, right, as a spiritual doctrine, we think that all the other doctrines who claim to be spiritual doctrine are necessarily going to be universal, right? But this is not the case. And from there, this tyranny of unconscious is born, where we don't study the Abrahamic literature enough. And as a result, we sort of give intolerance some amount of space in our society, right? And those intolerant, inadjustable doctrine try to sort of slowly eat up our society and our Hindu values, and as a result, it sort of create huge problem in our national values and national structure, right? And yeah, so as I have said, this unconscious tyranny is what enslaves the mind. The Hindu in his softness believes that these religions are simply different expressions of truth, that they are at their core the same, and this is laughable. How easily Hindus has turned a blind eye to the violence inherent in these faiths, in these Abrahamic faiths, the very soul of their doctrines. Christianity, with its God of sacrifice, spread its doctrine by the sword. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the colonial conquests, that were not the aberration of a true faith, but it is the very expression of Christianity. And obviously, then we have Islam, which claims to be the world conqueror. And the devout Muslim does not gently offer peace. He offers a world that bends the knee and a world that submits. The Quran commands its followers to wage jihad against all those who do not accept Allah as the only God. And then we have Judaism, right, which is another Abrahamic faith. We think that they are our ally or something, but then Judaism, the Jews think of themselves as the chosen people, and that's why here lies a religion that sees itself as separate from the rest of humanity, with a divine right to rule and to dominate. The very foundations of Judaism are based on exclusion, on the idea that the world the earth, the heavens belong solely to the Jews. For the non-Jew, there is no equality, no mercy, and there is only the position of subjugation. Okay. So yeah, so but the Hindus, uh, blind to these faiths or these quote unquote truths, they continue to live in a dream. They see the Abrahamic faiths through the soft lens of their own experience, through the assumptions of tolerance and acceptance that have been ingrained in them by centuries of spiritual Hindu spiritual teaching. They cannot comprehend that these religions are not just foreign, but fundamentally hostile to everything that they hold dear: their gods, their way of being, their path to truth. The Hindus, drowned in their own unconscious bias, cannot fathom the destructive will behind these outwardly pious facade of these faiths. They do not see their violent history, the violent history of the Abrahamics, their endless wars of conquest, their crusades, and their conversions. Okay, so this is the tyranny of the unconscious, which is a problem that Hindus are facing because they don't study the Abraham literature. Or even when they study, they refuse to believe that these sort of exclusionary principles can claim that they are the principles of God, right? And this creates sort of a paradox in a Hindu mind, and sort of lead them to give to accept these faiths as the principle of God, right? Okay. And then what this lead, like the tyranny of unconscious, it gradually lead to reflection of spontaneous morality. What is spontaneous morality? Spontaneous morality is something that emanates from within. Okay. So a contrast to spontaneous morality is external morality, or the intention morality, or the scriptural morality, which has an existence outside your so-called your atman, your purusha, right? So there is a book, let's say, right, in Abrahamism. For example, in Abrahamism you have an external book, and whatever is written, so it is claimed that those books are books from the sky, from heaven, and then these books are the only source of morality. And so this way Abrahamism create a source of external morality. And whenever your spontaneous morality that emanates from within, it does not match with this external morality, you are forced for submission, right? And because of this mismatch between the spontaneous morality and the external morality, um, it creates a split within your mind, and that split gradually lead to bad conscience, right? And it lead to sort of destruction of your innovation, destruction of free speech, for example, destruction of acceptance as a principle. So all these things, right? So now, by giving acceptance to these Abrahamic scriptures and the values therein, we sort of try to, so paganism, or overall a large part of Hindu Dharma, it emanates from within. So they are pretty much spontaneous morality. But by giving acceptance to these Abrahamic principles, we try to sort of reflect our spontaneous morality on Abrahamism. In the sense that we think that the
Bijit,
Abrahamism are same
Bijit,
as the.
yeah, just
Uh-huh.
sorry for interjection to break your flow. Just could you just because we hear a lot about paganism, okay,
Mhm.
and our own faith dharma, okay. Is there a small difference or a fine difference between paganism and our Hindu dharma? Is there a difference, or is it more or less same? Because that
So
is
the
something which
similarity,
I also struggle
right?
in many ways to understand it.
Right. So pagan itself is a word given by the Christians. But I don't have a huge problem with that. I mean, Christians gave the name in a very pejorative way. It pretty much it what it means ki these are the worshipper of the nature, right? So I actually I am writing about this in my current book, but I can tell you the very essence, and some analogies. Analogies are never correct description of something, but nevertheless it will help you to understand what we are trying to say here, right? So, Christianity, for example, they claim that paganism, they are cult because they don't have the real knowledge of the God, because they are engaged in the worshipping of nature. But God is something who is sort of alienated from the nature and who live in a place which is sort of separated from our earth. Why? Because in earth only sinner can be born, right? uh, in Christianity, human beings are inherently sinner. Okay. Why? Because we are descendants of Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve committed the original sins. So because they are the original sinner and we are the derivative of Adam and Eve, so the whole humanity is sinner. Okay. In contrast to, for example, paganism, who considers that, okay, the god is sort of embracing the earth. I mean, the god is not alienated from earth and its functioning, the nature and its functioning. um, and we are not sinner. They don't have any idea of original sin. So that's why Christianity consider paganism as sort of as some sort of a so to say, I don't know, it's like sinners, it's kind of satanic, right?
Exactly.
Because they
Yeah, that's
right.
what I wanted to actually come to you, because uh, the the kind of classification which happens in the Abrahamic way is that you are with God or you are with Satan. So now, even in the movies that we see in Hollywood and in Western culture, the Hindu faith or the any other faith which is non-Abrahamic faith is portrayed as satanic and evil. So that's why I wanted to actually get an understanding, because they are painting everything into one. But
Right.
the paganism, which they say that paganism itself is nature worship. We also do
Hmm.
nature worship, but
Right.
our nature worship has gone beyond nature worship and become a scientific way to look at the nature and learn from it, and that was not existed with pagans of early pagans. So we incorporate a lot of pagan ideas, but we have gone beyond those things. So in that way, paganism is not equal to Sanatan Dharma that we practice now. Just thank you.
Right. So, for example, paganism considers, like paganism in general, they construct God from natural phenomena, right? So, in paganism, you will find equivalence of Indra, equivalence of Varun, equivalence of Pavan, right? But then Hinduism goes much beyond that, and there are beautiful writings of Rishi Aurobindo on this sort of abstraction of paganism to create Hindu Dharma. So, for example, when you consider Saraswati, Saraswati used to be originally a river, but then we sort of, because all the scriptures were written on the banks of Saraswati river, so then what happened, we sort of started to abstract Saraswati as the goddess of knowledge. So by this very process, we sort of created some gods which are inherently abstract. They don't have direct relationship with the natural phenomena, but they have relationship with our bhav jagat. So paganism, a large faction of paganism, has gods only from the jada jagat, right? But Hindus have gods from the bhav jagat as well. So Hindus have gods from bhavlok as well as bhutlok, right? And that's a subtle distinction between paganism and the sort of post paganism, I would say, which is Hindu dharma. But both Hindu Dharma and paganism are satanic, and Hindu Dharma inherently is a pagan religion for the Christians. So loosely, I am saying saying the word paganism here. But but no matter whether it is Hinduism or paganism, there is a space for the spontaneous morality that I'm trying to discuss here, right? In spontaneous morality, it is something which is coming from within, right? um, and because we have a spontaneous morality that is sort of that creates a sort of universal values, we try to reflect those universal values on the Abrahamic scriptures, while it is not the case, right? So that's why this reflection of spontaneous morality actually creates ignorance in Hindu Samaj, and it is actually very lethal, right? This reflection of spontaneous morality is a problem for that we are facing, right? When we see ki Ramakrishna Mission is doing worshipping of Jesus, right? I mean, it is, if you read Swami Vivekananda, he himself commented a very important thing which goes as this. So Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda said that this moksha or nirvana, it is a phenomena which you have to achieve with effort. It cannot be like there is some divine which directly sort of give through a thunderbolt, elevates you to that level of nirvana. It can happen, but it is rare, and it is not advisable. So this was his stand on Abrahamic prophethood, right? But Ramakrishna Mission, I don't know what is happening to them. They don't get, probably they are getting funding from the I don't know, Christian missionaries. That's why they are doing these kind of things. But this is what is happening in Ramakrishna Mission. What is happening in Ramakrishna Mission is actually reflection of spontaneous morality. um, so this is one issue. The third point that I wanted to discuss is ascetic ideals, renouncing rajas, and its projection onto the meaning of life. Okay, so I have to discuss. This is again a very fine point that I'm trying to derive. It may offend a few um, of our, uh, I mean, audiences who are basically watching this, but and I'm happy to sort of argue with them. But then ascetic ideals and renouncing rajas is something that probably was happened during the medieval era, when there was this Mughal or other sultanate in Delhi. So what do I mean by this? I mean ki obviously, in our Hindu shastras, we have discussed three guns, right? Three gunas. What are those? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Right now, Sattva guna is something that leads you to this non-dualistic understanding of nature, at least by the um, Siddhant of our Vedantas. And Sattva gun can be achieved through the study of Vedas, right? um, and it has a direct relationship with some sort of, let's say, once you understand this world, you start to gradually elevate yourself beyond this worldly functioning, and as a result you try to sort of renounce one by one the your earthly qualities, right, to achieve this oneness with God. While rajas is something, for example, rajas is not embracing the worldly qualities, but it deals with, let's say, things like renouncing laziness is one example. Rajas is, having good quality food. That is rajas. So it is basically getting the best out of the worldly functioning and worldly qualities, but it is not a complete renunciation of the world and the qualities therein. It can be as well as, like, it can be fighting war, for example, right, and emerge victorious, right? So these are rajaguna. Tamas is basically laziness, not eating good food, not reading shastras, not having good sleep, right? Ahar and nidra, these are like having good quality food, good quality sleep is something which is prescribed in Gita itself, right? So these are basically tamas. Not sleeping good, not eating good, laziness, not reading shastras, right? Being disrespectful for your culture, right? Being ignorant about what is going on around you. These are tama qualities. Um, and what happened during this Muslim sort of era, in medieval era, when Muslims are sort of largely ruling a large part of our subcontinent, is that Hindus gradually started to renounce the rajas. Okay. uh, and which means ki they started to, in order to not create friction between Islam and Hinduism, they started to say कि अच्छा कोई बात नहीं, we will adopt the ascetic ideals, we will be engaged in sort of reprimanding ourselves, we will engage in, let's say, kathor tapasya, which can go to any extreme, including renunciation of food, let's say, health, right? And we will create a spiritual doctrine which will be in a way very much separated from the worldly functioning, because at that time the administrations and all the pretty much all the worldly functionings were being managed by the Ashtrafs in the subcontinent, right? um, and then obviously when Hinduism started to go in the more ascetic direction, obviously some of its interpretations got projected into the meaning of life, right? It started to claim things
Bijit,
like life is.
Bijitda, just one
Mhm.
interjection for the
Sure,
audience.
sure.
So, Hinduism, after we had Jainism and Buddhism, and these two specific dharmic punths have a really bent towards asceticism. So, do you think what kind of impact or influence they had in this in the earlier stages?
Um, so Jainism and Buddhism did not ever say ki a Raja is not important, right? When all the Tirthankars, they were Kshatriyas. So, if you study all the 24 Tirthankars, starting from Rishabdev, all of them started a very royal life. Then they, in order to understand life, they sort of went into deep sort of study of literature and meditative practices. But they never said ki the rajas quality is inferior quality, right? For example, rajas is never denounced even in Gita. But if you read modern interpretation of Gita by various institutions, they try to create a hierarchy as if rajas is very much inferior as compared to our sattva gunas, right? But obviously, I mean, in some part of Buddhism may involve. I mean, Buddhism is, again, because it was created much after Jainism, it may have some part where they are denouncing the impact of a woman in the society, for example. uh, those kind of things, those are actual renunciation of rajas. When Buddhism is telling you ki actually women are sort of evil and you have to, they don't say the word evil, but you have to stay away from women in order to attain mokshas. No, Hinduism has examples like Harishchandra, for example, right? Harishchandra, which I am going to quote in a while, his story. So Harishchandra had a wife, children, and all the prajas, and he's trying to protect everyone, and in the process he's trying to even sacrifice himself, right? Now it's so the ascetic ideals of Harishchandra is not coming from a void, right? It is coming from the deep wish to ask for well-being of all his prajas and wife and the children. So ascetic ideals gradually, when overall our dharma, Sanatana dharma, when they try to create ascetic ideals out of vacuum, that led to problem, right? And obviously, it started to get projected onto the meaning of life overall. Um, why? Because then things like life is inherently meaningless, these kind of doctrine came into picture, started to come into picture. And as a result, what happened, that that they started to sort of create inherently, I mean, they started to create a different meaning of shunyata, let's say. Okay, so shunyata in Hindu scripture is actually a very it's a concept of non-dualism. It's not a concept of void, right? And gradually, shunyata started to be interpreted as a meaningless life and sort of contextual understanding. Now, just give me a second. Uh, right. So, so where are my points? I'm just trying to. Okay. So when life became, so they started to claim that life is inherently meaningless. I wanted to say something here, which is that, but life, inherently has a meaning, because life has a meaning at the level of life. And if you study, for example, physics, you know that the laws of physics, they have a scalability, which basically mean ki the laws of physics, they might look different in a classical dimension, let's say up to a few millimeter. And then if you go to, let's say, 10 to the minus 6 meter, right, micro, at that level, there are mesoscopic physics where the laws look a little bit different. And then beyond 10 to the minus 9 to 10 to the minus 28, 33, at that level, right, as you go to even dig deeper, you get different form of physical laws. So physics inherently has a scalability, and obviously maybe there can be a sort of grand unified theory which start to look different um, at the various level, but it does not make any of those laws meaningless. I mean, you cannot say sitting at, let's say, 10 to the minus 9 at the level of atoms, you cannot say in Newtonian physics is meaningless, right? So actually, if you go try to go even deeper, there are various works by Kenneth Wilson, for example, on renormalization group, where they he actually tries to sort of portray this one thing that um, by resumming the sort of all the sort of objects and their theories that you see at your level, you can actually create a law at a level which is, let's say you have a law at 10 to the minus 9 meter, right? And then you try to sort of create a universe with it. Then as you start to sort of aggregate sort of individual functioning of little atoms at 10 to the minus 9 meter, you will see that it will gradually emerge at 10 to the minus 6 into something, some Brownian motion physics. So at each level you have different law, but it does not mean that physical laws at any level are meaningless. So, which basically, I'm trying to say, after alluding this kind of example, is that life has a meaning at the level of life, and we cannot deny that. Okay. Now, when Hinduism is saying ki life, matlab Hinduism or the ascetic ideals, that faction of Hinduism is saying life does not have a meaning. They are trying to renounce the rajas, and in the process they are trying to they are actually renouncing the very juice of life. I mean, the juice of life that let them think and create and understand the higher order functioning of life. They are renouncing that very base of life, and I have a problem with that. I think this is a problem that Hinduism has created in its own image, right? In its own shadow. So again, one form that Bhagini Nivedita actually commented one important thing, that conquest is the highest form of sannyas, right? What is sannyas? Sannyas is samyak nyas, right? Sort of complete or uh, total organization of yourself, right? And if you are sort of adopting the ascetic ideals, you cannot have this complete sort of organization, because you have to interact with people, with your followers, with your family, in order to sort of either spread your ideas or to understand the nature or to understand the very earth. You have to win their heart, you have to win over other ideologies, and that way you can sort of spread your idea, and that is actually a great form of sannyas, right? I mean, Gautam Buddha, he did not die in a cave. He came back to our society. He sort of spread his knowledge, his understanding, then he died. So in a way, Gautam Buddha also did a form of adopted a form of conquest, right? And he was successful in that. So conquest is probably the highest form of sannyas, and we cannot avoid that fact. Yeah, dearth of modern Hindu shastras. So what happened, and yeah, so basically we know that if you read Veda or Vedanta and Smritis, for example, you can sense it has that smell of, you know, village. You know, it was created in the nature, very nature, right? um, and it was created in abundance, where there is no sort of cessationist policy that is ruling them, the families. There is no fracture in family dynamics. There is abundance of food, abundance of oxygen, abundance of life, right? Um, and hence it was created in a very, so to say, unurban environment, right? um, and over then, what happened as we sort of moved into, let's say, medieval era, other than Sikhism, we did not create puns which are sort of, I mean, even Sikhism also not that urban, but gradually we stopped creating modern shastras, right? And so, in the medieval era, as the science progressed, we somehow forgot to merge our spiritual understanding with that contemporary social, socio-political, and scientific understanding, for example, right? So that was a problem, that we have a dearth of modern Hindu shastras. At the same time, if you see how Islam spread here, so there were large number of Islamic scholars who actually worked on interpretation of Islam, how to spread Islam in Indian subcontinent, how to otherize Hindus, how to dehumanize Hindus, how to create madrasas, what should be taught, what should be the duties of the Badshah. So there was large number of, and then all those were further consolidated in the era of Aurangzeb to create Fatawa Alamgiri, which was a big collection of hadiths, fatwas, so to say. Then these guys, Barelvi, Deobandis, segments, faction of Islamism were created, and now pretty much these ideas are ruling the Islamic world. A large number of modern ideas that are ruling the modern Islam are created in the land of Bharatvarsha, right? So, for example, Talibans are actually Deobandis, right? Uh, the idea of this two nation theory, it was sort of served in a very modern form by people like Sayyid Ahmed Khan or Iqbal, right? But when we think of our side, there were very few Maharshis who came in the last 1,000 years. And as a result, there are right now dearth of Hindu Shastras. Many of the Hindu texts actually are badly interpreted. Okay, I mean, at my level of understanding of Sanskrit, I'm saying you very in a very humble way. Um, I see that some of the words are being misinterpreted because they don't. Whoever are translating don't have a good understanding of Shabda Roop or Dhatu Roop of a Sanskrit word. um, and and some of the, for example, nowadays even the Muslims have started to interpret and write their own tikas on Gita, so that they can prove this one Allah, one God kind of theory. um
Yeah, just one thing I need to add to here this. Uh, so when you talk about like Muslims are now writing articles on Gita to prove that Allah actually exists and it is same as Hindu Brahman, that has been going on for, I think, like there are more in the like in the Middle Ages and in the modern period there are more writers who are not Hindus and they wrote most about Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma. That's a long legacy which is still there with us.
Yeah, they basically sowed the seed of secularism, right? So to say. But just compare this with the number of tikas that we have produced on Gita from our side, right? After understanding Sanskrit, um, see, I always say this. When the Sanskrit scholars in ancient ages they created a sloka, they're very specific with the interpretations. Okay, they're very much concerned ki, so the discussion goes to the level of saying ki, so when the Sanskrit scholars are saying, if we write our understanding in the form of sloka, would not it reduce the meaning of our understanding? Like writing a sloka, is it enough, or along with the sloka we have to write the tikas? So it was I'm basically quoting probably the words of Shankaracharya, the Adi Shankaracharya. um, so so they knew ki, because you see, in Sanskrit you have very specific shabdarup and dhaturup from which the words are emerging, and then they have shabdakosh as well, which define a word. So in if you go to English dictionary, you will find synonyms, but there were Shabdakosh in Sanskrit which defines the word. Okay, ki in terms of the original Shabdaroop from which it emanates. But we don't care to sort of go through those in that detail in order to understand the slokas in various shastras, and in the process we very much deform our interpretation of shastras. And why this has happened? It has happened because first of all we lost our all those institutions, big institutions, big libraries, um, and we lost our coherence and communications between big institutions, big Hindu institutions, because all the Hindu institutions pretty much got destroyed,
Hmm.
specifically in the north. And so, because they were destroyed, it led to a discontinuity of the legacy of our knowledge and our spirituality, at least spiritual understanding. So whatever we are dealing with right now, it's a very small residual of our huge volume of literature that were written in ancient ages. So obviously, yes. So we have dearth of modern Hindu shastras and their interpretations. And then we have to understand very clearly one important thing, that jat or castes, they are not eternal values. They depend on the contemporary socio-economic conditions, and hence they cannot be Sanatana. I mean, there are various smritis, for example, who try to solidify gunas into jatis, but gunas can be eternal. Jat cannot be eternal. Okay, so we have to be very categorically. We have to denounce jat or varna as a sanatan value, right? Because, for example, if you think of different, let's say, systems that are running in different countries, like for example consider US. There you have a economic rich class, right? That class is, you had for example Andrew Carnegie, or you had Rockefeller. So they got, and or JP Morgan, for example, right? You have the that guy who, and they sort of accumulated huge amount of wealth, and then they started to do philanthropy, right? They created various universities, they created various institutions, and those institutions are pretty much running the world right now, right? So in terms of innovation, they did something which involved not only the Vaishya quality, but also some amount of Kshatra quality as well as the Brahman quality, right? They created educational institutions, they created, say, they funded defense, right? So in that context, what would you say about that guy, Rockefeller, for example, right? um, you cannot sort of categorize into this sort of any street, like whether he was a Vaishya or he was a Brahmin. So we have to, he had all these gunas, right? But he did not belong to any specific jati, or Jat, when we try to sort of, if we try to sort of leave him, we cannot sort of categorize him into a rigid caste, right? And this kind of understanding in modern days, you have various businessmen who are, for example, not running business with ethics and values, right? So probably some of them are, they will go to the class of Shudras, right? So you don't have, or even they will go to Demon, not even Shudra, because Shudras are related to Seva. They are not doing any Seva. I mean, all the Sevas that they are doing are actually demonic. So they will probably go to some Rakshasa class, right? But my point of saying is that these are not eternal values. Jati or caste is, they are not eternal values. So we have to abandon that sort of categorization in order to move forward, right? We have to think of the values which are eternal, to create institutions which will serve us for the longest time. Um, and in that context, we have to abandon jativad or casteism, whatever you call it. State, next point is state intervention into the Hindu values and practices. So you know that it started with, let's say, the controlling of temples. Well, it started even before that, when the British came, and in order to rule the Hindus, because they saw that the Shariat was running the country, because pretty much the Ashraf community ruled India for a very long time. So they promoted Shariat, and it was Shariat which was running India for a long time. And the British thought that we cannot, even though there are inherent inconsistencies in Shariat, we cannot completely abandon Shariat. So they created these legal codes out of Shariat only, and they implemented those laws to rule Hindus as well as Muslims. So that was probably the first intervention of the British Raj to rule Hindus, right? To Hindu values. And then gradually they started to sort of control Hindu temples. Why? Because during the Sepoy Mutiny, they found one important thing, that the message was spreading from temple to temple. So they needed to stop that communication. They needed to stop these practices where the Hindu scholars were being valued and respected by the whole community. So in order to stop that, they started to control the temples, and this is something which is still going on in quote unquote independent India. Uh, and then after that, there was this, I think, Hindu. What was that Hindu code? So it was Nehru who actually started that. Hindu marriage law and other codes in 1956, I guess. Okay, so Hindu personal law, I guess. I forget the exact
Hindu
uh,
code bill, Hindu code bill, Hindu code
Hindu
bill.
code bill, right?
Yes.
In order to, so that way they penetrated into Hindu marriages, Hindu family system, Hindu values of the family, right? And it is still going on. I mean, and the Hindus are denied from creating their own like Hindu institutions of education, as an example, right? While the minority community, I mean, you can open an educational institution in the name of, let's say, language, okay, in the form of, I don't know, there are various, but you cannot create Hindu institution, educational institution. Hindus are denied from that sort of privilege, while the minority can still, minority communities, they can retain their institution and they can create new institutions. As a result, for example, even now there are practices where, in order to be a principal of a Christian collegiate school, you have to convert, right? So these sort of things are actually going on for a very long time. uh, and yeah, so So these are the state intervention into Hindu values and practices, and as a result, the Indian state itself is waging Jati Varna war, gender war, fragmentation of Hindu families, Hindu marriages, and Hindu way of sustainability, right? Obviously, you know all these Ambedkarite movement, and they are trying to connect it to the Islamic Jihad by Jumla like Jai Bhim, Jai Mim. You have the gender war, where they are passing sort of bills like domestic violence and all these bills which are not gender neutral, and they could have easily made a that kind of bill gender neutral, so that no matter whether a man or a woman is being oppressed in a relationship, can go to court. But no, that is not allowed. Why? Because Indian judiciary or Indian sort of state want to create a gap between man and woman, right? That's why they are sort of, it is an old tactics, right? Divide and rule. You favor one and you dismiss another, and that will create a rift, that will create a sort of degeneracy within the society. And right now it is taking a very sort of atrocious situations where vertical split is being created between man and woman in India, Hindu man and Hindu woman to be specific. Gender war, so I talked about fragmentation of Hindu families. So for example, Indian state, they are uh, sort of, they favor some sort of economics which actually are promoting, for example, decline of Hindu fertility rate, so to say, right? Because I mean, in the initial days, all the Hindu villages were actually pretty much sustainable, self-sustainable. They did not need any Delhi to sort of come and govern a village or to sort of intervene in its functioning, right? Because all the villages pretty much in the subcontinent, they had they had, first of all, large number of families, and then there were people engaged in agriculture, people engaged in, let's say, like local cotton industry, weaving, right? Then there were people who engaged in, let's say, fishing. There were people who were engaged in education, imparting education as well as getting education. So that way, Hindu village used to be self-sustainable. But gradually, through various implementation of laws, the Indian state itself started to intervene into even remote Hindu villages. And as a result, what happened? So a large Hindu exodus overall is happening from village to the town, right? And this sort of abrupt urbanism is leading to a situation where, let's say, there are no good teacher in Hindu villages. That's one thing. Secondly, I mean, the distribution of food or the grain in village is getting disrupted by the sort of union that are being run in local districts, right? Hindu sort of local weaving industry is completely decimated, and this is as a result making a Hindu family dependent on the Indian state, and the way it rations and distribute various wealth. And because now Indian state is imposing high taxes on various goods that it is distributing or rationing or overall spreading in the market, it is becoming even more costlier for a Hindu family to sustain the livelihood. And as a result, all these Hindu families are like the big joint families are facing fragmentation, right? Obviously, I discussed the Hindu marriages because through different Hindu marriage law and all these kind of things, they're creating a rift between man and woman, which is leading to which is stressing the marriages and promoting gender war. Hindu sustainability, right? So in the name of you have to understand one important thing that um, uh, uh, let's say afforestation, right? Afforestation is something that Hindu Dharma promotes, but Christianity or Islam, they actually say, I mean, there are fatwas in Fatawa Alamgiri which says that masjid should not have a tree. Why? Because the kafir, they have tree in their temple. The masjid should not have any tree in its premises. Or you have Christianity where they are saying ki you can sort of um, decimate a whole jungle to develop a civilization, right? So these sort of things led to, I mean, deforestation of the whole earth, um, and this way it is impacting the sustainability of our subcontinent and the Hindus there. You know, obviously, I mean, it is impacting everyone, but Hindus are the majority in this country. So Hindu understanding of sustainability is being challenged by the Indian state itself many time in the name of development. I am not anti-development, but there has to be a process which you have to follow and which are not being followed many of time, independent of whether you have a Congress or other form BJP government, for example, are there in the center.
Yes. So,
Um,
Bijit, just one point I need to add. When you mentioned development, okay, as and we have seen a lot of say dubious environmental activists. In Gujarat, we had Narmada Dam, okay, which was stuck with the activists trying to block it via various methods. And we know that those activists were funded by the Western countries, organizations, to actually stop that dam so that the Gujarat could not have the water and the electricity to to provide water to its people. So, but we have to understand in one aspect is that we have now the kind of picture we see in Europe and China, where they have actually devastated their environments. They have built dams, they have cut down forests, they have changed courses of the rivers, and now Europe is undoing those damages by dismantling dams to actually see when you have a like when you have something correct, so you have the handle and then you have the blade. Now, they have to be there. So you need forests, you need waterways, you need rivers. You just cannot build factories all over the country. What you will eat? So this sustainable development where we take into account and build our prosperity is something which is taught by our dharma, our shastras. So why we are copying now? We see China, the water and the soil is so polluted that they can't grow food. So do we want that kind of development? So whenever we talk about environment, people think, okay, people talking about Medha Patkar. No, we are talking about our Dharmic Shastras, which has taught us how to do farming, how to actually build a sustainable environment where we keep a tulsi in our homes. That is what we need, and not the blind copying of Western industrialization policies, which will actually destroy and become we will become a next China if we follow this. Thank you.
Right. I mean, whenever we see pictures of ancient temple from in the photographs taken in 1800s or 1900s, you see it is surrounded by large forests or big trees. Right. ये तो होता ही था मतलब लोकली कोई अगर टेम्पल होता है उसके बगल में एक बड़ा पुराना पेड़ होता है जहाँ पे लोग बैठते हैं, गप्पे लड़ाते हैं, कुछ और करते हैं, डिस्कस करते हैं चीज़ें, गांव के अलग अलग चीज़ों के बारे में चर्चा करते हैं, बट ऑलवेज वेदर यू गो टू साउदर्न इंडिया और इन नॉर्थ इंडिया, you will see always ki there is a local temple which has a very old tree, at least one old big tree इन इट सराउंडिंग, जो जो एक्चुअली उसका एस्थेटिक्स को बढ़ाता है, राइट? इनहेंसेस द एस्थेटिक्स ऑफ ए टेम्पल. एंड आई सिंसियरली होप ये जो अयोध्या का फॉर एग्जांपल राम टेम्पल बन रहा है, देयर विल बी इनफ स्पेस within that our main sort of area, where they will be planting trees, and trees like banyan trees और पीपल का पेड़, जहाँ पे वो एक्चुअली बड़ा होगा, सो दैट 500 साल बाद लोग देख सकते हैं कि भाई ये पेड़ उस टाइम पे लगाया गया था जब राम टेम्पल का, राम लाला का प्राण प्रतिष्ठा हुआ था. And I mean, I say a very simple thing: you want to be a good Hindu, create forests. Okay, plant trees. It is actually in accordance with the Hindu values. um, ये जो रैम्पेंट जो मान लीजिए डैम बना के, ये पाकिस्तान ने किया सिंध को, जैसे सिंधु नदी जो है वहाँ पे, या फिर उसका जो एट्रीब्यूटरी रिवर्स है वहाँ पे इतना डैम वैम बना लिया कि सिंध में अब ढंग से पानी नहीं जाता सिंधु रिवर का, एंड इट इज इम्पैक्टिंग द एग्रीकल्चर इन द सिंध इटसेल्फ. um, तो इसलिए मैं कहता हूँ कि हाँ, यू यू हैव टू बी वाइज, यू हैव टू क्रिएट. इनफैक्ट टेम्पल में जैसे बड़े पेड़ भी होते थे, उसके साथ एक वाटर रिजर्वर होता था फॉर एग्जांपल, जहाँ साफ पानी मिलता था. ये किस लिए बनाया जाता था? ये सिर्फ भगवान के लिए नहीं बनाया जाता, ये इसलिए बनाया था ताकि लोकल लोग, अगर कोई ड्राउट आ जाए, ऐसा कुछ आ जाए, उस टाइम पे ये कंज्यूम कर सके, यहाँ से जो पानी है वो ले सके, राइट? एंड यू व्हेन यू गो टू सिटीज लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल उदयपुर, there are huge these sort of sarovar which enhances the aesthetics of the palace itself. And ये सब हम लोग भूल ही गए हैं. मतलब if you think again, in our example of Ram temple, वहाँ पे वाटर रिजर्वर कहीं है क्या? Once you create a structure, you then you create a water reservoir. Actually, it actually enhances the beauty of the temple itself. Sorry. हाँ. तो ये सब तो एक ऑब्वियस चीज है जो हमें समझना होगा. हाँ, you wanted to say something? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was saying that the Ayodhya temple, the Ram temple that we have, I am not sure whether they have a reservoir, a pond, a small pond, because normally even in the North Indian temples, in the Nara style temple, there were actually water bodies. So, but slowly this water body was something which actually was not there in the later temples. Even for modern temples like Birla Mandirs and others, do we see that water body being there, part of the temple architecture?
अभी जो टेम्पल जितने भी बनाए जा रहे हैं वहां पे तो वाटर रिजर्वर, क्योंकि वहां पे जब एक स्ट्रक्चर पे, मतलब
Is
वो
that
वाटर
a
पे जो
space
रिफ्लेक्ट
problem?
करता है, इट
Hmm, hmm.
लुक्स इवन बेटर. बट अभी
No,
तो कुछ नहीं, मतलब.
is that a space problem or some problem with the permissions? What is like, because even for a like
आई डोंट नो.
earlier period, even for a earlier period in North India, that a temple always consisted of water bodies.
एग्जैक्टली.
Hmm.
एग्जैक्टली,
Maybe
यू हैव
we
टू.
will see that part.
जो मैं डिस्कस करूंगा, हाँ, आगे मैं
Hmm.
एक अष्टदिक्पाल और 10 दिक्पाल एक डिस्कस करूंगा, वहां पे ये चीज शायद आएगा.
Hmm.
एनीवे, तो ये तो हमें समझना होगा, राइट? हिंदू सस्टेनेबिलिटी. And this Hindu way of understanding of sustainability is being challenged and subverted by the Indian state itself. Then we have secularism as an invading ideology and as a tool of Hindu jati vidwans. राइट? मैं हिंदू जाति विध्वंस इतने बार इसलिए यूज कर रहा हूँ बिकॉज जो कश्मीरी एक पंडित थे, जोन राजा, उन्होंने राज तरंगिनी 2 लिखे थे. वहां पे एक्चुअली जो हमें लोग जेनोसाइड जिसे कहते हैं, उसका एक वर्ड एक्चुअली 500 साल पहले कॉइन किया गया था. दैट्स व्हाई आई एम एक्टिवली promoting this word jati vidwans, because in our scripture we have already defined it. It was defined by Jon Raja of Kashmir. um, हाँ, तो सेकुलरिज्म एज एन इन्वेडिंग आइडियोलॉजी एंड एज अ टूल ऑफ हिंदू जाति विध्वंस, इसको मैं एक्चुअली अलग अलग, मतलब आई एम राइटिंग अबाउट इट एक्सटेंसिवली फॉर माय नेक्स्ट बुक. एंड just secularism, I want to read a few things from there. um, yeah. First thing is so this secularism, by as promoted by the Indian state, it is manufacturing resentment. Okay. Resentment or resentiment is something that was defined by Nietzsche, and it is actually, it denotes resentment between ideologies. But in the context of India, it is secularism which is manufacturing resentment, because quote, whoever is not practicing secularism is committing a sin. By running this propaganda incessantly, the Indian state creates within a Hindu mind a bad conscience, a sense of guilt, a form of cruelty directed inward. Through this process, Hindus get constantly kicked and whipped by the system, until one day he wakes up, decides to give up his Hindu qualities, that is, spontaneity, festivity, attainment of higher self through passionate thoughts and deeds. He is constantly reminded of his sins that he or his ancestors might have done in the civilizational past. And then he is offered suffering as some kind of a reward, along with the perpetual promise of the state to exculpate him from his civilizational sins. मतलब इंडियन स्टेट ने एक गढ़ दिया है कि हिंदू पहले बहुत प्रिमिटिव हुआ करता था. सॉरी. हिंदू समाज में बहुत ज्यादा जातिवाद ये सब था, या कास्टिज्म था. तो नाउ यू हैव टू डू योर अटोनमेंट, एंड सो यू हैव टू अडॉप्ट सेकुलरिज्म एज अ प्रिंसिपल ऑफ दिस लैंड, right? So yes, and then he's offered suffering as some kind of reward, and along with the perpetual promise of the state to exculpate him from all his civilizational sins, given he suffers now, and he suffers a little more. A Hindu does, like a hen, get imprisoned by a chalk line drawn by the very Indian state, which he himself elects, and seeks promotion, seeks protection from his for his sustenance and survival. The state, in response, gradually institutionalizes him, then invalidates him, then declares him a sinner, a criminal, to send him to an eternal guilt trip from which he never recovers. Right? So and then तो ऐसे होता है slowly. Then with the legal, financial and other kind of assistance from the very Indian state, appears the Abrahamic priestly class, the Ashrafs and the Padris, with their religious opium and many other cult narcotics, to take advantage of this guilt trip of a Hindu, gradually besieging the consciousness of the Hindu society, and finally relegate Hindus to an inferior position in their own nation. Hindus do not understand what is good for them because they are eternal sinners. Hindus do not know how to govern, hence he should take up the responsibilities to he should give up the responsibilities to rule the nation. Hindus do not know how to run the temples, hence their temples must be seized. Hindus do not know how to grow crops, and the world anyway belongs to Allah and Allah alone. Hence, the land of India should belong to Waqf. The Indian state, with the Abrahamic priestly class, starts to overwhelm Hindus with the waves and waves of such attacks. Right? Once Hindus acknowledge कि भाई हमारे इसमें गलती था, इसमें कास्टिज्म भरा एक पास्ट है हमारा, तब इंडियन स्टेट थोड़ा और इंक्लूड करता है. इंडियन स्टेट तब पादरी, ठीक है, प्रॉफिट और अशराफ और फिर मौलवी, इनको लाता है, इनको फंडिंग करता है पूरे सोसाइटी में ये प्रोपोगेट करने के लिए कि हिंदूज have done a much more damage. Hindu can don't know how to rule temple. Hindus don't know how to run economics. Hindus are eternal sinner. हिंदूज डोंट नो कि एक लैंड को लेके क्या किया जा सकता है, तो इसलिए वॉक ऑफ को दे दो. तो इस तरह से सेकुलरिज्म धीरे धीरे, लाइक ए ट्रोजन हॉर्स, इट एंटर्स इनटू द हिंदू कॉन्शियसनेस, और हिंदुओं को थोड़ा थोड़ा करके अपना जमीन छोड़ने के लिए बोलता है. द जमीन इन द फिजिकल वर्ल्ड एज वेल एज इन द realm of thoughts, right? So through this process, gradually a Hindu start to lose his own piece of past, his own piece of history, his own piece of geography, his own piece of Sanatan ecosystem, his own piece of spiritual and socio-political understanding of life, art, science, literature, ocean, governance, allies, neighbors, anything and everything that a race needs to survive happily and healthily in this planet. This process is doubly devious Since this perpetual loss of Hindus at the hand of Abrahamics, along with the out and out religious conversion by the Abrahamics into their own respective cultish folds, gradually engendered deepest resentment in the heart of Hindus. यहाँ से फिर अभी जैसे पॉलिटिकल हिंदुत्व आया है ना, हमारे दिलों में थोड़ा रिजेंटमेंट आ जाता है अगेंस्ट द स्टेट, अगेंस्ट अदर फैक्शन ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी. And this resentment, something that the Abrahamic cults have mastered over 1,000 years, internalized it, and elevated it to the level of art and spirituality within their own society. Something that a Hindu can never beat them at, right? अब हिंदू के माइंड में जब रिजेंटमेंट आने लगा, उसी वक्त हिंदू थोड़ा सा अब्राहमिक एट्रीब्यूट अडॉप्ट करने लगा. नाउ you cannot beat an Abrahamic person in the art of resentment. Okay, a Hindu with this resentment in his conscious or subconscious mind, implanted by the Indian state, stays no more a Hindu, for he has now accepted an inferior guna. In fact, the most inferior and one of the fundamental of all Hin gunas. Thus begins his slow, gradual journey, albeit unconsciously, towards Abrahamism. This very transition of a Hindu from being free and spontaneous to being resentful, sick, self guilted animal makes him a sinner in his own eyes and opens the floodgate of religious conversion. तो इस तरह से मैं आर्ग्यू कर रहा हूँ कि बिकॉज ये जो रिजेंटमेंट आ गया तो हिंदू थोड़ा अब्राहमिक हो गया. हिंदू के हिंदू बिकम अ लिटिल रिजेंटफुल, सिक एंड सेल्फ गिल्टेड, जो बेसिकली दरवाजा खोल दिया रिलीजियस कन्वर्जन का. सो इस तरह से मैं सेकुलरिज्म को देखता हूँ. मैंने और भी काफी चीजें लिखा है, सेकुलरिज्म एंड इंटेंशन मोरालिटी एंड सेकुलरिज्म एज द टूल ऑफ हिंदू जेनोसाइड, वो भी मैंने एज द फाइनल टूल ऑफ हिंदू जेनोसाइड, जहाँ पे आई एम बेसिकली सेइंग कि ideologies are not neutral. They reflect the material conditions and power structures of the society. Secularism in India stands as one of the most unfortunate ideological legacies imposed on the nation of Bharat by the unholy alliance of Congresi Babus, British Sahibs, jihadi extremists, and the communist bootlickers of Russia and China, the four malignant forces that played a role in the partition of Bharatvarsha. Over the last 70 years, since the transfer of power in 1947, secularism has become the most sly and pernicious ideological superstructure, sustaining and legitimizing the power of the Abrahamic elite, whether Islamic, Christian, Marxist, or in its most insidious form, the so-called secular intellectual class pushing the westernization and Abrahamization at the expense of pious Hindu values of this land. It is the freakiest work of art driven by these Abrahamics, whose intention morality is rooted in deep resentment against Sanatan Dharma. These Abrahamics, dissatisfied with their own importance, create systems of morality that mask their desire for vengeance and domination. This invention of secularism in the context of Bharatvarsha is nothing but a hollow, disembodied external morality that seeks to create a false equality between all religions, regardless of their inherent contradictions. The Indian state in the last 1,000 years has been an abysmally abnormal entity in an otherwise normal ancient nation. And in the name of secularism, the Indian state has tacitly endorsed the marginalization of Hinduism while elevating the cultural and religious ideologies of the so called minorities, particularly Islam and Christianity. In the Hegelian dialectic, history moves through contradictions and their resolutions, thesis, antithesis, thesis, and synthesis, a process that pushes history forward. In the case of India, secularism presents itself as the thesis, a framework designed to resolve the antithesis between the various religious communities. However, instead of leading to a harmonious synthesis, secularism constantly reminds every citizen of his identity and his lineage, then exploits his identity for petty political purposes and Abrahamic conversion agenda. And in the process deepens the division, creating fault lines between the communities that were once united by a shared cultural and philosophical heritage. The concept of unity in diversity, which is supposed to be the hallmark of Indian civilization, has thus been obliterated under the weight of secularism's promise of equal recognition, identification, and stratification. ठीक है, तो A secularism enforces Hindus to view themselves through the lens of an alien ideology. Just as the Christian church in medieval Europe used the concept of hearsay to fracture and control, secularism has functioned as a modern tool of ideological hearsay. The Hindu who does not comply with this new secular order, who refuses to assimilate into this new framework, is labeled as quote unquote a kafir, an outsider, a heretic, an undesirable to Indian state. Thus, by adopting secularism, the Indian state has paved the way for a society in which Hindus are constantly under scrutiny for the fear of majoritarianism, while other religions are allowed to flourish unchallenged. The Hindu identity is no longer allowed to be a force of self affirmation. It is now something that must be continually justified against an ever expanding set of foreign ideologies. Thus, secularism becomes not a refuge for freedom of belief, but an ideological gauntlet through which the Hindu identity must pass only to emerge fractured, diluted, and subjugated. As Marx himself would contend, the ruling class perpetuate ideologies that serve its material interest. In this context, the material interest of the Indian state is the preservation of the so called secular order that keeps the various factions in check. But most importantly, it preserves the hegemony of the Abrahamic system that has historically always sought to dominate the cultural landscape of the entire subcontinent. And this secularism is totalitarian. It must infiltrate every nook of Indian thinking, culture, habits, festivals, education, research, history, and geopolitics. Every spontaneous aspect of Bharat must be twisted, toppled, and whitewashed in the process to create a secular Bharat. And like any other totalitarian ideology, it has to be swift, brutal, and efficient. It attempts to saturate the society as quickly as possible. It quickly creates a hegemonic ideological environment. Once dominant, leaves little room for dissent. This efficiency is not accidental. It is built into the very structure of any Abrahamic system. This secularism is not merely an ideology. It is an instrument of state power designed to maintain the dominance of the elites by reducing cultural diversity and consolidating religious and ideological control. You read it right. Indian secularism is without a doubt the new religion of India, a new Abrahamic religion that is born out of the zimud of Hindus from the shadow of their own negation. It is the new form of imperialism, conceptualized to completely annihilate Hindus from the face of the earth. Indian secularism is the ultimate instrument of Hindu genocide, wielded to mold this nation's destiny eventually towards a Hinduless Bharat. So that is my stand on secularism, and yeah. So all this I said and I wrote just to prove that secularism is an invading ideology. It is a tool of Hindu Jati Vidwans to create a Hinduless Bharat. Okay. So then the next point that I wanted to discuss was refusal of Hinduism to adopt urban nature. Right. So as we have already discussed, if you go to villages, right, you see a lot of temples. I mean, there are as many almost as many number of temples as the number of families living there. But as
Yeah,
soon
you
as
have
this,
Gram Devata, Ishu Devata, Griha Devata. That concept is there. Correct? Every house has its own Devata, Ishu
right.
Devata, a Gram Devata,
Right, and
or
then there are devtas specific to a
Lok
specific
Lok
para,
Devata, Lok
specific
Devata.
colony, right? Exactly. But as soon as you start to migrate to cities in the urban landscape, right now, you don't see many temples, right? I mean, I went to Kochi recently, and in all the chabutras, all the uh, in the landscape, even you see many churches, you see big mosques. Where are the temples in Kochi? um, and it is only us who are responsible for this partially. Why? Because we have we I mean, in modern days, we have failed to sort of extract new meanings and new shastras from our existing Hindu scriptures. As a result, this existing Hinduism has sort of refused to adopt an urban nature. Um, and whatever sort of Hinduism that you see being discussed in the urban context, they have adopted intention morality. They are not born out of spontaneous morality. And as a result, what happens is that you they are not natural. Like, we have to create natural Hinduism and keep it in the urban context, and we are failing to do so. And in a because of this, after let's say mass production started to dominate industry and as well as the urban way of life, Hinduism gradually have failed to sort of give disha to this newly industrialized world. What should an urban man do? How should an urban man extract meaning and interpretation from Vedas or Vedantas? We're still stuck. I mean, we have to sort of, not reduce, but we have to keep the concept of nirvana or various gunas like rajas in the modern urban context. We have to create shastras, slokas to give solace to this modern urban people, and because they are not going to live in a village, right? To sort of cherish this very juice of Hinduism. So yes, we have failed historically to modernize Hinduism and create a new segment of Hinduism called urban Hinduism. It's a failure that we have to acknowledge. So these are the failures that I have discussed, and gradually we have to move towards solving all these issues, all these problems, and in the coming, I don't know, half an hour, I'm quickly
No,
going to discuss all the solutions.
no, no issue, no issue. Go ahead.
Okay, so, huh, the first point that I was thinking was introducing the concept of Ashtadikpal or Das Dikpal. So in Hinduism, we have 8 directions, right? We have, I mean, at least in the um, uh, we have 10 directions, including the up and down. But overall, in the sort of um, in the I mean, the earth can contain sort of in this horizontal sort of direction, we have in total ashtadik, which are purab, paschim, uttar, dakshin, vayu, agni, nairit, and vayu, agni, and ishan, right? We have vayu, agni, ishan, and nairit. That are the 8 directions. Our Hindu architecture also adopt this sort of ashtakon sort of architecture you will see in North India in many many masjids, for example, who are basically built after converting a temple. So we have this Ashtadikpal. So we have 8 gods who are sort of protecting these 8 directions. So Kuber is the god of the fortune, who is basically ruling the north. Yama is ruling the south. Yama is the god of justice and death. Indra, the king of heaven, king of Swarg, is ruling the east. Varun, the god of water, seas, ocean, rain. Um, he is ruling the direction of west. Ishan is the northeast. Ishan is the god of birth, death, resurrection, and time. Agni is the god of fire, and Agni is ruling southeast. Vayu is who is the god of air and wind. Pavan he is basically ruling northwest, and Nairit, the god of sorrow and decay and death, he is ruling the southwest. Okay, so these are the Ashtadikpal that we have to introduce in the Hindu temples and Hindu consciousness. Why I am saying this? Why I am introducing this weird old concept, right? Um, you see, if you understand Islam, then Allah is basically a political idea. His Allah is form of a feudal lord with unquestionable sovereignty over the land, right? And it is actually written in a verse in Quran, ki Allah is the sovereign, right? All the land belong to Allah. And through this single verse, they have actually renounced the idea of nationhood in Islam. Now, Hindus bring down their divinities while fighting these earthly physical ideas like Allah. You cannot compare Allah with any god, right? Allah is, I mean, it's a very political idea. Hindu gods are not political ideas. So Hindu divinity treats the Jad Jagat as, or the physical world, as just fuss, at least through ascetic ideals. No wonder the Hindu gods do not care much about the phenomenon happening on the soil and on the dirt of this planet. The task of Hindu gods are to lift a man up from Jad Jagat to Chit Jagat and eventually to a non-dual understanding of this universe. But it gives a very little instruction on how to ensure political stability on earth and how to expand this philosophy, this message or attempt of God to lift up the humanity from the level of Jiva to the level of Brahman. The Varna-based Hindu society could protect Hinduism through the narrative of Kshatriya, right? The bravery and courage. The essential guna of a Kshatriya to have if he or she wants to attain moksha. But a secular Indian society where you get thrashed at every step of your life for being a Kshatriya, there is no one to protect and fight for Dharma. As a result, Hinduism has effectively been stripped naked by the post-independence secular casteist polity. Now, to fight Islam in this context, we need a God who, point one, is one and the same entity across the spread and the breadth of India or the world at large. We need a God or more gods who is or her uh, his or they are the supreme sovereign entity of the land above all laws of India, who owns all the land and water and air and soul of this land, who is or who are responsible for the protection of Hindus and Hindu land and Hindu Rashtra. Five, who protect Hindu temples and who worship Hindu Ishwar and Param Brahma, who deserve the unquestionable loyalty of all the Hindus and regular prayers and services of Hindus, who give a better next life based on how much a Hindu do for the upliftment and benefit of Hindu Samaj, and responsible for the moksha based on the dharma and karma of a Hindu in his current life. So this is in this context we have to introduce the idea of this Das or Ashta Dikpal who will protect all our temples, because these Dikpals are basically equivalents of kings who are looking at all directions and sort of in a way recording all the karmas of the people of this land, you know. um, uh, so they are necessary so that Hindus, so that I mean, so these gods are sort of equivalent to the political sort of representation of Hinduism. What I'm trying to say here, and by introducing these gods into the Hindu consciousness, we can equivalently bring Jaimal and Patta, with the Dwar Rakshak of the Chittorgarh fort. Um, during the invasion of Akbar in 1567. So Jaimal and Patta, because they were these two Dwar Rakshak, they entered the consciousness of Rajasthan. And whenever, most of the time, when they build houses, they keep Jaimal and Patta as the guardian, you know, it's the Dwar Rakshak of their home. In a similar way, I am trying to bring up this idea of Ashtadikpal, um, who will pretty much protect us, who will ensure the implementation of law and order, as we understand from the Hindu perspective, not from necessarily from the secular constitutional perspective. But let's say we have a temple in a place, then we will have all these Ashtadikpals who will be sort of the kings of Hindus. Okay, and Hindus will sort of obviously pray, as well as they will come to these Ashtadikpal for justice. Okay, it's sort of creating an equivalence of work of both, but it is like going much beyond that, because these Hindus can donate their, let's say, whatever production of seeds, right, or clothes, or whatever production that Hindu society is involved in. They can sort of donate or devote to these eight sort of gods who are taking care of the world and the soil of this land, um, by their very existence, right? So yeah, so next, so this new god, so next, Dikpal temple can
Uh,
be founded
Bijita,
in.
just one addition to your point. Okay. So, the one thing which is my personal belief, so which, and people are happy, and if they disagree with me, uh, we are in a kind of a conundrum, okay, a catch-22 situation where Hindus in general, n- uh, in general, in specific areas, were being dominated by the invading forces for millennia, for almost hundreds of years of centuries. This created a kind of administrative, political, and psychological structure which we, and unfortunately in 1947, when we had our independence, this was continued and even reinforced more virulently. That created a kind of situation where, uh, are we as Sanatanis have been little bit too impatient in terms of changes we want to see, considering that there have been a 5 centuries of anti-Hindu state running to actually eliminate us.
Right, right, that is true. And yeah, so in this context also, this is relevant. For example, once during these reclaiming temples, right? Um, one of the main point that being raised from probably the government side or from the side of the ruling party is that if the temples are freed from the government control, who are going to take care, um, because there are so many puns and so many this and that, because Hindus are very much decentralized, so no one is going to accept the dominance of one panth over other while forming the temple board. But here, this idea of Dikpal can actually come to use, because once temples are freed from the government control, the Dikpal can take control of all temples, obviously in a very abstract way, and Hindus will maintain the trust on the Dikpal's behalf. So just like Ram, right? Ram Lala, when there was this case कौन लड़ रहा था, right? So Ramlala, we considered him as minor, and on behalf of this minor devta, some wakil was fighting the case, and then it got reduced down to a land dispute, and it actually, once it started to being interpreted as a land dispute, obviously we came as the sort of winning side, right? In this case, here the Dikpal, this idea is coming from Vedas. So no Hindu can sort of dismiss Veda. I mean, I know that there are very small factions who can dismiss Veda, but overall, when it comes to temples, pretty much all the punths that are being run in this country, they source their spirituality from Veda. So this will solve that specific problem कि टेम्पल का देखभाल कौन करेगा, दिक्पाल करेगा. हमारे पास अष्ट दिक्पाल है, जैसे अपने लोकल मोहल्ले में गांव में होता है कि एक टेम्पल होता है, और उसके इर्द गिर्द कुछ देवत्व प्रॉपर्टी होता है जो भगवान का प्रॉपर्टी होता है। तो ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ भगवान हम लोग उस प्रॉपर्टी का देखभाल करते हैं। तो कोई स्पेसिफिक बंदे का वो जगह नहीं होता, वो भगवान का जगह होता है। तो इसी तरह हम लोग दिक्पाल को ला सकते हैं, बिकॉज दिक्पाल आर एक्चुअली द यूनिफाइंग आइडिया सोर्स फ्रॉम वेदा। तो लोग डिस्प्यूट इसमें नहीं कर सकते, जो डिस्प्यूट करेंगे वो हिंदू नहीं रहेगा। एज सिंपल एज दैट, राइट। सो इवेंचुअली जब ये दिक्पाल अगर पॉपुलराइज कर सकते हैं हम लोग, देन द फाइट ओवर द लैंड एंड कन्वर्जन विल देन इफेक्टिवली बिकम द फाइट बिटवीन दिक्पाल एंड अब्राहमिक गॉड्स। तो इससे क्या हुआ, जैसे महादेव हो गए या फिर अपने जो बड़े बड़े भगवान हैं, उनको नीचे लाने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ी। These are being taken care of by the quote unquote our pagan gods, right? Uh, so that's why the fight over the land and conversion mafia will then effectively become the fight between the Dikpals and Allah or the Christian God. And subsequently, Hindus will have less confusion. ठीक है। जैसे काफी टाइम बोला जाता है, अरे राम मंदिर बनने से, अरविंद केजरीवाल का देयर वाज अ कोट कि अम, कि ये राम मंदिर, मेरी नानी जी कह रही थी कि ये जो राम मंदिर बना इससे सबसे दुखी तो रामलाला होंगे। तो हिंदू भी कंफ्यूज हो जाता है, हाँ यार राम तो मतलब इज द एपिटोम ऑफ वैल्यूज, राइट। तो राम ऐसे रैम्पेंट सॉर्ट ऑफ डिसहार्मोनी एंड ये सब क्यों चाहेंगे। तो ये इसमें हिंदुओं को कंफ्यूज करना आसान होता है। बट व्हेन यू allude टू these पेगन गॉड्स, वहां पे ये कंफ्यूजन नहीं रहता कि अगर यहाँ हम लोग ये मंदिर का जगह अगर वक्फ बोर्ड कब्जा रहा है, इसमें हमारा कोई एक दिक्पाल नाराज होगा, हमारा जो अष्ट दिक्पाल है वो नाराज होंगे, बिकॉज इट इज देयर लैंड, देयर प्रॉपर्टी। तो इसमें हिंदुओं को थोड़ा फायदा होगा, कम हिंदू आइडियोलॉजिकली भटकेंगे इन दैट आर्ग्यूमेंट। तो ये मेरा पहला एक सॉल्यूशन था। ऑब्वियसली मतलब जो स्टैंडर्ड सॉल्यूशन डिस्कस होता है उससे थोड़ा हटके ही मैं ये सब चीज़ें बता रहा हूँ। एंड देन द सेकेंड वन वाज कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ हिंदू ज़कात, जो हम लोग पहले भी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं आई थिंक इन वन ऑफ द प्रीवियस पॉडकास्ट्स। कि ज़कात में क्या होता है, जो अशराफ कम्युनिटी होता है, सो कॉल्ड द हायर क्लास, हायर कास्ट Muslims, they give zakat, a portion of their income, टू लोकल मस्जिद्स, जहाँ से बेसिकली गरीबों को, गरीब मुसलमानों को खिलाया जाता है। हिंदुओं का ऐसा सिस्टम अगर था भी तो वो बिगाड़ा गया, बिकॉज गवर्नमेंट का कंट्रोल हो गया टेम्पल पे। तो लोगों ने फिर डोनेशन देना धीरे धीरे बंद हो गया। एक जो स्पेस होता था जहाँ सब लोग एक साथ आ सकते थे, चीज़ें बांट सकते थे, वो बंद हो गया। तो ये जो जक़ात का कोई इक्विवेलेंट हिंदू जक़ात सिस्टम हम लोगों को, हिंदुओं को क्रिएट करना पड़ेगा, जहाँ सो कॉल्ड ब्राह्मण कम्युनिटी हो जाए या क्षत्रिय कम्युनिटी हो जाए, वो अपने इनकम का एक पोर्शन लोकल टेम्पल में या कहीं देंगे, जहाँ से गरीबों को खाना खिलाया जाएगा। अगर हॉस्पिटल में कोई गरीब, अगर किसी का कुछ ऑपरेशन की ज़रूरत है, उसके ऑपरेशन के लिए पैसा दिया जाएगा। सो दैट वो जो ब्रिज थोड़ा टूट गया है बिटवीन द अपर क्लास एंड लोअर क्लास इन टर्म्स ऑफ मनी ऑब्वियसली, उसमें स्टेट ना इंटरवीन कर सके। अभी क्या हो रहा है, जैसे एक लोकल जो पॉलिटिक्स है वो यहाँ पे इंटरवीन करके बोल रहा है कि ये देखो अम्बेडकर तो बोल के गए थे कि ये लोग तुम्हारा ध्यान नहीं रखेंगे। तो अगर हमारा लोकल इकोसिस्टम क्रिएट हो गया जहाँ पे एक ज़कात रहेगा, जहाँ अपर क्लास रिच हिंदू विल टेक केयर ऑफ द लोअर क्लास पुअर हिंदूज, सो टू से, तो इसमें स्टेट का इंटरवेंशन भी कम हो जाएगा। और इससे समाज में जो डिसहार्मोनी हो रहा है, जो फ्रैक्चर हो रहा है, वो कुछ हद तक वो सॉल्व हो पाएगा। Yeah, so related to this idea is concept of community kitchen and community education, right? कि ठीक है, ज़कात या जो भी पैसा हो, हिंदुओं की जो लोकल इकोसिस्टम होगा वहाँ लोगों को खिलाएंगे, या फिर एजुकेशन का भी स्कूल वूल खोलेगा। अब तो हिंदू कोई इंस्टीट्यूशन भी नहीं खोल सकते, हिंदू इंस्टीट्यूशन इस देश में खोलना मना है। एंड प्रोबेबली रामकृष्ण मिशन इज नॉट रजिस्टर्ड एज अ हिंदू इंस्टीट्यूशन। विल बी
No,
सरप्राइज्ड एंड शॉक्ड। Huh?
No, 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 no. So Ramakrishna Mission fought a case. They went to the court and they got a order. They are registered as a minority institution, technically not a Hindu organization.
Right.
Technically, Ramakrishna Mission is not an Hindu organization. They are registered as a minority organization because that is the only way they could actually run their own institutions.
Exactly.
This is
Exactly.
the level at which people have to go to secure to preserve their heritage and education. So that's what we're looking at.
So just imagine, in this country, Hindus cannot have their own institutions. तो ये कम्युनिटी किचन और कम्युनिटी एजुकेशन और कम्युनिटी इंस्टीट्यूशंस, ये सब हमें बनाना पड़ेगा. इसके लिए अगर लड़ाई लड़ना है तो वो लड़ना पड़ेगा. बट इवेंचुअली हमें ये जीतना है और ये बनाना है थ्रू आउट इंडिया. ये लोकल हिंदू इकोसिस्टम्स क्रिएट करना है. वी कैन नॉट डिपेंड ऑन दिस सेक्युलर इंडियन स्टेट दैट इज actually engaged in Hindu Jati Bitvans. Anyway, the concept of 95 thesis. So I think it happened in the time of Martin Luther, I guess. तो जब प्रिंटिंग प्रेस आया, तब क्या हुआ कि तब बाइबल लोगों के हाथों में पहुंचने लगे. And that actually effectively ended the hegemony of the church in dictating the moral and otherwise all kind of social or socio-political values in Europe. एंड ऐसा हुआ कि मार्टिन लूथर एक लोकल चर्च में which he prepared 95 points, he printed it in some local printing press और फिर चर्च में जाके चिपका दिया. तो फिर वो लोगों के नज़र में आ गया. एंड देन ये जो न्यूज़ जब फैल गया चारों ओर, इट एक्चुअली रिड्यूस डाउन द मोनोपोली ऑफ चर्च इन यूरोप. हमें सिमिलरली ऐसा कुछ करना है. अगर सुप्रीम कोर्ट या फिर सिमिलर कोई इंस्टीट्यूशन इंडियन पार्लियामेंट हो जाए, ये या फिर कोई पॉलिटिकल लीडर जो इराडिकेट सनातन धर्म की बात कर रहा है, तो ऐसे इंस्टीट्यूशन में हमें प्रिपेयर करना है. ऐसे 95 पॉइंट्स हो जाए, 150 पॉइंट हो जाए, बड़े से एक लिफलेट प्रिपेयर करके हमें वही इंस्टीट्यूशन को घेराव करके वहाँ चिपकाना है. ठीक है. मतलब वी हैव टू कम टू द स्ट्रीट विथ 95 रख सकते हैं बिकॉज इट इज ऑलरेडी पॉपुलर. इट विल गेन द अटेंशन ऑफ द वेस्ट इमीडिएटली. अगर मान लो कि 95 पॉइंट लिख दो अबाउट इंडियन स्टेट और हम लोग जाके सुप्रीम कोर्ट में चिपका के आएंगे कि अगर इसका एक हफ्ता एक महीने का अंदर इलाज नहीं हुआ तो हम और प्रोटेस्ट में जाएंगे. तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जाओ, पार्लियामेंट में जाओ, चिपकाओ. ऐसे एक मूवमेंट तैयार करो जहाँ पे तुम बोलो कि तुमने हिंदू धर्म के साथ जो किया है वो एक्चुअली जेनोसाइडल है और इसको तुम्हें रिवर्स करना पड़ेगा. ठीक है. सो ये वी हैव टू क्रिएट सम 95 thesis movement. Okay, similar kind of movement countering countering Sadasatru. So we have already discussed this. There are 6 kind of main enemies, um, whom Hindus are fighting in their own land. uh, this is in the line of this idea of Panchamakar given by Sandeep Devji, but I've extended upon it to create sort of Satru, 6 enemies. So they are MNM, the Mullah, Maulavi, Ashrafia, Mufti class, missionary, the Christian missionary. Teen is the number Marxism, um, and then they that want to sort of um, break India apart into 18 different nations. मार्क्सिज्म के बाद मैकॉलेज्म और मैकलॉयलिज्म. कि इन दिस मतलब मैकॉले ने जो एजुकेशन सिस्टम प्रमोट किया था इंडिया में, एज ए रिजल्ट वी हैव क्रिएटेड दिस एलीट बाबू क्लास हु कैन ओनली स्पीक इंग्लिश, with zero understanding of Indian values. And as a result, and they are taking important, assuming important positions in various offices. सो मैक्लोयलिज्म हो गया 4 नंबर. 5 नंबर हो गया मिलॉर्ड्स, द मैकोलिस्टिक, समटाइम मार्क्सिस्ट secular judiciary, who are assisted by the Christian and Ashrafi values, and they who despise the Hindu sort of way of life. और छठा हो गया द लुटियंस मीडिया, राइट. जो मीडिया अगेन दिल्ली में बैठ के पूरे इंडिया में फेक न्यूज़ फैलाता है या फिर प्रोपागेंडा फैलाता है, तो ये सारे शत्रु को तो फाइट करना ही होगा, एंड वी कैन डू इट इंटेलेक्चुअली. इम्प्लीमेंटिंग हिंदू कोर्ट इन लोकल लेवल. जैसे पंचायत राज जो भी था, जितना भी सरपंच होते थे, ये सिस्टम को बिगाड़ा गया. किस लिए बिगाड़ा गया? ताकि लोकल रिमोट विलेजेस पे क्रिश्चियनिटी जैसे आइडिया पेनिट्रेट कर सके, है ना. तो हमें लोकल लेवल पे, चाहे वो अपना विलेज लेवल पे हो जाए, चाहे फिर डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पे हो जाए, हमें लोकल हिंदू कोर्ट इस्टेब्लिश करना होगा. एंड ये हिंदू कोर्ट अगर कोई डिस्ट्रिक्ट कोर्ट हो गया या फिर हाई कोर्ट हो गया, सुप्रीम कोर्ट हो गया, इनके डिसीजन से अगर डिसएग्रीमेंट होगा, तो ये लोकल हिंदू कोर्ट अपना पक्ष रख सके कि वी हैव आवर ओन सेंस ऑफ जजमेंट, and your deracinated Indian court is not in line with our Indic value system and Indic sense of justice. तो लोकल हिंदू कोर्ट हमें बनाना होगा. शास्त्र एंड शस्त्र शिक्षा, राइट, जो भी पुराने शस्त्र शिक्षा है उसको वापस लाना होगा. ऑब्वियसली अगर हमें शूटिंग वगैरह कोई सिखा सकता है, दैट इज गुड, बट शस्त्र शिक्षा से स्पेसिफिकली क्या होता है, वो रजस का थोड़ा इमर्जेंस होगा, राइट. हिंदूज विल नो कि हाउ टू डिफेंड देमसेल्व्स. मैन्युफैक्चरिंग डिफेंस इक्विपमेंट्स, ड्रोन वोन, ये सब लोकल लेवल पे बनाना सीखना होगा. लर्निंग एटलीस्ट 5 languages. Maybe I am asking too much, but English, Hindi, Sanskrit, mother tongue, and either one North or one South language, South Indian language. ठीक है. Working on
And
Rajas.
I think one thing, just on the languages part, I just want to actually add. So, like, if we learn language scientifically, if you learn Sanskrit, I think 50% job is already done. Like, if you can
Right.
learn Sanskrit in just at a intermediate state, you will be able to speak and understand Kannada, the Telugu, Bengali, Odia, Hindi, everything. Actually, even I
Right.
can understand Kannada almost 50% without knowing anything, because I know part of the Hindi words.
Right, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
probably Hindi is the Sanskrit is the mother of all languages, not only Indian but large part of European languages. And by knowing Sanskrit, one good thing that happens, you know the source of these words. You know, no matter what words you are using. जैसे सिर्फ इंग्लिश अगर पता करते हो तो उससे पता नहीं चलता है कि ओरिजिनेट कहाँ से हुआ है लैंग्वेज, राइट. बाय नोइंग संस्कृत यू नो द सोर्स ऑफ दैट रिवर कॉल्ड लैंग्वेज. ओके. और इससे बहुत सारी चीज़ों का डेफिनेशन तुम्हें मिल जाता है. बहुत सारी चीज़ों का वही ओरिजिन जब मिलता है, फिर कोई आइडिया कैसे सबवर्ट होता है वो तुम्हारे आंखों के सामने दिख जाता है कि ओरिजिनली इसका ये मीनिंग रहा होगा, बाद में इस वर्ड का मीनिंग को बदलाया गया है. या फिर लैंग्वेज में काफ़ी सारे जो अनवांटेड वर्ड्स होता है, इन द फॉर्म ऑफ फारसी हो जाए, है ना, या अरबी हो जाए, टर्किश हो जाए, तो अनवांटेड इन्फ्लुएंस कैसे हो रहा है, कैसे डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ अदर लैंग्वेज हो रहा है अपने इंडियन लैंग्वेजेस में, वो पता चल जाएगा, तो तुम्हें प्रोपागेंडा पकड़ना मतलब आसान होगा. Anyway, working on Rajas by building akhadas, broad footpaths, ठीक है, प्लेग्राउंड, स्पोर्ट्स, हाइकिंग, जिम. मतलब मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि अखाड़ा बनाना होगा ऑब्वियसली. एंड देन वी नीड टू क्रिएट ब्रॉड फुटपाथ्स इन इंडियन अर्बन स्पेस, ताकि लोग हेल्दी रह सके. जब आप फुटपाथ क्रिएट करते हो, तब लोगों का वॉकिंग हैबिट थोड़ा बढ़ता है. वॉकिंग हैबिट जब बढ़ता है, उससे यू क्रिएट अ रेस who are not that much prone to diseases, you know. इंडिया में ऐसे भी इट इज़ अ ट्रॉपिकल रीजन, तो इंडिया में सनलाइट बहुत आसानी से ज़्यादा मिलता है, which is good actually. And along with it, you have to have some sort of, walking practice. For example, you have to do basic things like jogging in urban space, right. इसका मौका नहीं मिलता. क्यों नहीं मिलता? क्योंकि यहाँ फुटपाथ बहुत कम है, या फिर बहुत छोटा है, लोग यूज नहीं करते. सो यू हैव टू क्रिएट विद इन द अर्बन स्पेस. क्रिएटिंग ब्रॉड फुटपाथ इज actually encouraging the rajas. Playground, right? We have to encourage various sports, hiking, gym. um, फिर ये वाला पार्ट तो डिस्कस कर चुके हैं, ट्री प्लांटेशन एंड एफोरेस्टेशन, राइट. रिक्लेमिंग एंड रिकवरिंग हिंदू आर्किटेक्चर. जो हिंदू आर्किटेक्चर के बारे में आई थिंक 20-25 शास्त्र ऑलरेडी एग्जिस्ट करता है हमारे पास. उसको थोड़ा एक्यूमुलेट करना, उसे कंसोलिडेट करना. जो भी काफी सारे मुस्लिम या फिर क्रिश्चियन आर्किटेक्चर इंडिया में, मतलब क्रिश्चियन स्ट्रक्चर्स इंडिया में है, जो दे पोर्ट्रे एज some sort of, I don't know, Turkish or Persian architecture, but they are inherently Indian architecture. उनको reclaim करना है. और नए स्ट्रक्चर्स क्रिएट करना. ऑब्वियसली यू हैव टू फॉर्म न्यू टेम्पल्स, बिग टेम्पल्स स्पेसिफिकली इन नॉर्थ इंडिया. एंड टेम्पल इकोसिस्टम्स, जिसके बारे में तो हम लोग बात कर चुके हैं. रिड्यूसिंग डिपेंडेंस ऑन ऑयल इन सर्च ऑफ अदर नॉन कन्वेंशनल एनर्जीज. दिस फॉर ऑब्वियस रीजन टू रिड्यूस द इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ अरब. अरब का ओवरऑल मतलब ये जो ऑयल का दबदबा खत्म हो जाएगा तब, मतलब इस्लामाइज करने के लिए जितना फंडिंग अरब से मिलता है और इट गोज टू द होल वर्ल्ड, वो बंद होगा और वो दुनिया के लिए अच्छा होगा. फ्रॉम फ्रेमिंग लॉज बेस्ड ऑन राइट्स टू लॉज बेस्ड ऑन ड्यूटीज. मतलब इंडिया में कैसे होता है ज्यादातर, या फिर इंडिया का जो लीगल सिस्टम है वो वेस्ट से बहुत हद तक बोरो किया गया है. वेस्ट ने पहले जैसे इक्वलिटी ऑफ, मतलब रूल ऑफ लॉ, वो तो धर्म रक्षति रक्षित से आया है बेसिकली, है ना. ऐसी चीजें, या इक्वलिटी ऑफ ऑल बीइंग या फिर इक्वलिटी ऑफ ऑल ह्यूमन बीइंग, ये भी अपने शास्त्रों से आया है. बट देन वहाँ पे जो लीगल सिस्टम क्रिएट किया गया, उसको हमने ब्लाइंडली अडॉप्ट किया है विदाउट हैविंग रियल अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि कहाँ से सोर्स हुआ है. तो इसलिए क्या हुआ, काफी सारे जो लॉज है, दे आर बेस्ड ऑन राइट्स एंड दे डोंट लुक एट the duties that a specific individual has performed over time. तो इससे होता क्या है, कि अगर राइट बेस्ड लॉ है तो फिर, बिकॉज अब्राहमिक आइडियोलॉजीज आर इनहेरेंटली ऑफेंसिव इन नेचर, दे आर ऑलवेज आउट एंड आउट अबाउट अटैकिंग द नेटिव इकोसिस्टम एंड नेटिव बिलीफ्स. तो उनके लिए ये गेम खेलना थोड़ा आसान हो जाता है. क्योंकि कोई भी अगर मान लीजिए कोई एनोमली आ गया है ना समाज में, तो वो अपना राइट दिखा के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं कि दिस इज माय राइट टू डू दिस. और फिर मान लीजिए बिकॉज दे आर ऑफेंसिव, अगर 10 में 8 भी हार गए, 2 जीत गए, तो वो उनके लिए जीत है, राइट. तो इसके लिए हमें बेसिकली वी हैव टू क्रिएट लॉज दैट आर बेस्ड ऑन ड्यूटीज, so that we can hold them accountable for the offensive politics that these ideologies promote. अच्छा, फिर आया कि वर्क टुवर्ड द रिवाइवल ऑफ पेगन यूरोप. फॉर ऑब्वियस रीजन कि वहाँ पे यूरोप में पेगनिज्म अभी काफ़ी बढ़ रहा है. सो ओवर द लास्ट फ्यू सेंचुरीज यूरोप में तो क्रिश्चियनिटी काफ़ी हद तक खत्म हो चुका है. एंड नाउ द यूरोपियन sort of identify themselves as into various categories like non-religious, spiritual, atheist, agnostic, हाँ, spiritual but not religious. ऐसे ऐसे खुद के बारे में लोग बोलते रहते हैं. मतलब दे आइडेंटिफाई देमसेल्व्स इन इनटू दीज कैटेगरीज. तो यहाँ पे हमें, एंड द यूरोपियन सॉर्ट ऑफ फिलोसफी दैट हैव इमर्ज्ड ओवर टाइम, दे आर हाईली सोर्स फ्रॉम पेगन फिलोसफीज, पेगन ग्रीक और रोमन फिलोसफीज. जैसे वो लोग इतने ज्यादा एरिस्टोटल हो जाए, प्लेटो, सोक्रेटिस, इनको साइट करते हैं. दिस ग्रेट पीपल, दे वर पेगन पीपल, दे आर नॉट क्रिश्चियंस. एंड जो यूरोपियन जो रेनेसा हो गया या फिर पोस्ट रेनेसा फिलोसॉफिकल जो लिटरेचर हो गया, दे दे आर सोर्स्ड हाईली फ्रॉम, मतलब बीच में जो क्रिश्चियन पीरियड था उसको तो उनके फिलोसॉफिकल अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड डिस्कशन से लगभग गायब ही कर दिया गया है, राइट. विच मीन्स कि दे अंडर वैल्यू देयर क्रिश्चियन आइडेंटिटी, they completely reject their Christian identity, and in specifically in the context of academia. ठीक है. ऑब्वियसली क्रिश्चियन जो मिशनरी है वो कॉम्परेटिव रिलीजन, ये सब अलग अलग डिपार्टमेंट खोल के प्रोपोगेट करते हैं, बट नो वन इन बाइंग दैट। आई मीन इफ यू गो फॉर एग्जांपल टू प्लेसेस लाइक आम्स्टरडम, आम्स्टरडम में काफी, या फिर यूएस में होता है, काफी चर्चेस को ब्रूअरी में कन्वर्ट किया जा रहा है। काफी चर्चेस के बिल्कुल सामने ब्रॉथेल क्रिएट किया जा रहा है जस्ट टू मॉक द रिलीजन, quite justifiably. And at the same time, matlab, obviously with the pagan philosophy that Europeans are so much पैशनेट अबाउट, उन्हें उनका पेगन जो रिलीजियोसिटी है वो भी वहाँ पे रिवाइवल करवाना होगा। ये एक चीज़ है। ग्लोबल अलायंस ऑफ पेगन कम्युनिटीज ओवर द वर्ल्ड, तो काफ़ी नेटिव कम्युनिटीज़ है, रेड इंडियंस है फॉर एग्जांपल, यजीदीज है, उनके साथ हिंदुओं का ग्लोबल कम्युनिटी क्रिएट करना होगा टू promote the global paganism, and it will eventually help to promote the native culture first of all. Secondly, it will help to create an idea of the united rights. Okay, so it will create united rights, as in right as in the adhikar right, and right as in the right wing as well. So the only way to create united rights, or united right wing, so to say, global right, is by revival of paganism, right? और इससे और एक फायदा होगा कि इससे all the people of their land, they can understand the historical continuity of that specific land, कि पहले पेगन था, बीच में शायद क्रिश्चियन हो गया, बट overall every native land had their own sort of native pagan understanding of values as well as of spirituality. So that will give them a sense of continuity in their historical understanding. We recognizing Abrahamic ideologies as colonizing and genocidal doctrine. We have to be very vocal कि ये जो अब्राहमिक आइडियोलॉजीज है, दे प्रोमोट अदराइजेशन, they promote then the dehumanization, which eventually lead to jati vidvans, right? And then finally, transition from reactive to proactive policies. You see, the political hindutva is a second order phenomena. What I mean by that, कि पहले मान लीजिए हिंदुइज्म था या पेगनिज्म था, उसके रिएक्शन में तो दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ द जीरोथ ऑर्डर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ स्पिरिचुअलिटी initially as a, and then in the first order, the Abrahamic ideologies were created, that eventually led to probably global left, global conservatism, global, you can call them right wing loosely, right? I mean, so all these sort of Abrahamic subversive ideologies were created as the first order phenomena, as reaction to the pagan values. And then in the second order, in reaction to the Abrahamic values, the political Hindutva was created. The Hindutva of Savarkar or of RSS was created, for example. Now, so overall, the Hindutva that are being discussed in, let's say, Twitter or in other spaces, those are reactive Hindutva, right? But I mean, overall, ठीक है, reactive हिंदुत्व तो चलता रहेगा, but we have to go one step forward to create proactive हिंदुत्व, right? We have to create, for example, urban Hinduism. We have to understand what Hinduism mean in the urban context, in the industrial context. We have to understand Hinduism in the context of modern physics, जहाँ पे इतना ज़्यादा काम हुआ है नॉन डुअलिटी को लेके, सिमेट्री को लेके, इनवेरियंस को लेके, राइट, जिसे ध्रुवक कहा जाता है. We have to understand in the context of की फिजिक्स ऑफ हायर डिमेंशन फॉर एग्जांपल. ये सब के साथ अपने हिंदुइज्म को थोड़ा मॉडर्नाइज करना पड़ेगा, कि क्या हम जो मॉडर्न फॉर एग्जांपल फिजिक्स है उसको श्लोका के फॉर्म में लिख सकते हैं, राइट? इस तरह से हमें सोचना होगा. वी हैव टू अर्बनाइज हिंदुइज्म, वी हैव टू मॉडर्नाइज हिंदुइज्म, वी हैव टू क्रिएट न्यू श्लोकास, न्यू वर्सेस, ठीक है, जो विच कैन कैप्चर द माइंड ऑफ अ चाइल्ड एज वेल एज द माइंड ऑफ अ साइंटिस्ट इन द सिमिलर वे. हाँ, तो यही सब मेरे सजेशंस हैं.
Hmm.
I can go
Yeah.
on, but yeah, right now we should, from
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
side, I should stop here.
Yeah. 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 No. 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 I think it was like you gave a very comprehensive approach. Okay. So there is a lot to process for the audience who have maybe they need to watch it, rewatch it again to actually maybe write down a few points and see what we can do. And we will actually like carry this series. Okay. So this is an
Right.
overview. So we will have like multiple episodes. We will focus on specific aspects because all the aspects need further discussion and elaboration. To actually see why and we're doing this is very important. Why we are doing this. I have heard messages, spoke to people n number of times. They say, I don't know what to do. And this is a kind of a standard answer that, okay, I want to help something, but I don't know what to do. So, so this podcast with Bijidda and whatever we are doing is an answer to that pertinent, permanent question on every Hindu's mind that I don't know what to do. If you do not know what to do, maybe in my way, in my own faulty way, wrong, whatever way, I am trying to tell you, you can do this. So that's my effort to actually give few options, few suggestions, and you evaluate yourself. So you don't have to go and fight. Whatever actions you can take, planting a tulsi plant in your house is an action that will create a kind of bhakti bhav that will create a second order effect where you become more spiritually aware. That is also an action. It's not an insignificant action. For an individual, it's a very great action actually to do. To actually give peace of mind to your peace of mind by watching at the tulsi plant grow. And
राइट,
it
आई
will
कैन
give,
टेल यू फ्रॉम माई एक्सपीरियंस। मुझे बहुत ऐसे सर्दी जुकाम होता था इन मुंबई। तो फिर आई ग्रीव अ तुलसी प्लांट। तो फिर तुलसी का पत्ता एक दो मैं चाय में डाल के मान लीजिए पी गया, या फिर तुलसी का जो मंजरी होता है, जो फ्लावर कह सकते हैं, उसको चाय में डाला, या फिर बस जस्ट स्मेल द मंजरी, यू नो। थ्रू दिस सिंपल एक्शन मेरा बॉम्बे में मेरा जो क्रॉनिक एक प्रॉब्लम था वो एक्चुअली चला गया। मैं एंड तो मेरे जैसे फ्लैट का स्पेस है, तो फ्लैट में इट वाज द फर्स्ट प्लांट दैट आई गॉट। ठीक है, स्मॉल तुलसी। एंड फिर वहाँ से आई क्रिएटेड सॉर्ट ऑफ अ स्मॉल गार्डन, यू नो। तुलसी वाज द फर्स्ट प्लांट, फिर अलग अलग फूल लाया मैं, एंड आई फील गुड अबाउट इट। तो या, दैट्स अगेन अ फॉर्म ऑफ अर्बन हिंदुइज्म, राइट? कि यू कैन जस्टिफाई कि भाई घर में एक तुलसी रखो तो सर्दी नहीं होगा, वो जुकाम वाला वो सीन नहीं होता है। या सो या, सॉरी, गो ऑन, सॉरी फॉर
no, yeah.
इंटरप्शन।
So no. Actually, it's very important that you correct. It's important that I gave a theoretical perspective. You give a practical perspective. So this creates a kind of convincing argument, which actually people, if they hear both the arguments, that even planting a tulsi plant is something doing for you as an individual and doing for the dharma itself. Okay, and what benefits, tangible benefits you will get out of that? That you showed and told your story about how a tulsi plant at home, even at flat in Mumbai, can actually improve your health. Yes, it is quite extraordinary to believe that, okay, you need a $1 billion spent by a pharma company to do the research and then tell you this is good, and you will do it after 10 years of research. There is already a research done by our rishis for 5,000 years. They have put it in that scriptures. Just because you have been brainwashed for 100 years to believe that these are all mythologies, these are stories you can't believe in, that you have to spend your half your money to buy that medicine because that company has spent $1 billion to do this. We ourselves, by reading their books, by bringing Bijeet, who he writes a book, actually telling you, do a bit of self introspection, do a bit of critical thinking. Do not believe me, do not believe Bijeet, do not believe the book. Just think critically. Do not go by everybody's argument that he should be correct. He may be wrong. Go ahead and search for yourself. Okay, so for next 15 minutes, maximum 15 minutes, we will take one audience they want to ask any question to Bijeet. So
Sure.
we have Abhay with us. Abhay, go ahead with your answer, your question.
Hi, Abhay.
So, नमस्कार सर, नमस्कार दादा।
Namaskar.
हाँ, हिंदी बोल सकते हैं या इंग्लिश
यस
में भी
यस,
रखे?
हिंदी
हाँ,
है, नहीं हिंदी बोलो, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, हिंदी बोलो।
अम, तो मेरा जो ऐसे मैंने बहुत सारे पॉइंट्स बोलने के लिए रखे थे पर उतना समय है नहीं। तो मेरा मैं इसको दो क्वेश्चन में ही रखूंगा कि एक तो है क्या धर्म इज इक्वल टू रिलीजन, इसने बहुत ज्यादा क्षति पहुंचाया है क्या हमारे समाज को, और पहुंचाया है तो कैसे पहुंचाया है? दूसरा है जो सबसे बड़ी बात है, जो आपने कहा कि हिंदुइज्म इन अर्बन कॉन्टेक्स्ट, तो मुझे लगता है कि अर्बन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हिंदुइज्म रह चुका है। जैसे इंडस सरस्वती सभ्यता की बात करें तो वो अर्बन सिविलाइजेशन था, या फिर टेम्पल टाउन्स हो गए हमारे, सो दे आर अर्बन स्पेसेस। आई थिंक द मेन क्वेश्चन इज कि इंडस्ट्रियल और पोस्ट इंडस्ट्रियल सोसाइटीज में हिंदू धर्म कैसे रहेगा? क्या हम नए डेटीज क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, जैसे डेटी फॉर इंफॉर्मेशन, जैसे सॉफ्टवेयर हो गया, इंफॉर्मेशन इकोनॉमी आज सबसे बड़ा है। तो जैसे सरस्वती इज गॉडेस ऑफ नॉलेज, सो गॉडेस गॉड या गॉडेस ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन हो सकता है यानी। या फैक्ट्री में मैंने देखा है बहुत लोग विश्वकर्मा की पूजा करते हैं, और बंगाल में तो ये होता है। तो ऐसा कुछ किया जा सकता है क्या टू फॉर मेकिंग धर्मा अपील वेरी अपीलेबल और वेरी अपीलिंग इन मॉडर्न कॉन्टेक्स्ट, और
right,
पोस्ट इंडस्ट्रियल जैसे मैंने बोला सॉफ्टवेयर एंड ऑल? दैट इज माय क्वेश्चन।
right. हाँ, तो योर पॉइंट इज राइट। हिंदुइज्म तो अर्बन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में रह चुका है, अभी भी रह रहा है, ऐसी बात नहीं है। बट आई एम थिंकिंग फ्रॉम अ मिशनरी पर्सपेक्टिव, राइट, कि अर्बन स्पेस पे फैलाने के लिए वी हैव टू कैप्चर द इमेजिनेशन ऑफ द मॉडर्न अर्बन पॉपुलेशन हु हैज सीन मास प्रोडक्शन। एंड उसमें तो तुम्हारा जो नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन है वो तो बहुत पर्टिनेंट हो जाता है कि हम लोग नए डेटी क्रिएट कर सकते हैं। यस, क्रिएट कर सकते हैं डेफिनेटली। एंड हाउ टू प्रोपागेट इट, दैट्स द क्वेश्चन। अगर तुमने और मैंने क्रिएट कर दिया, एंड आई थिंक द ओनली वे टू प्रोपागेट इट इज थ्रू क्रिएटिंग टेम्पल्स इन मॉडर्न अर्बन स्पेस, राइट। मुंबई में हाँ, तथ्य देवता अगर कोई है, तथ्य देव कोई है, हम बनाओ। एंड आई हैव written one more article recently where I am trying to show that the equivalence of Abrahamic scripture is not Hindu library, but it is Hindu temples. Okay, तो ऑब्वियसली तथ्यदेव का कोई स्क्रिप्चर क्रिएट करना, वर्सेस क्रिएट करना करो, बट उसका एक अच्छा मंदिर बनाओ। ठीक है, बॉम्बे में बनाओ, जहाँ पे भी है, अगर बेंगलोर में बनाना है उधर बनाओ। सो दैट लोग, और वहाँ पे बोलो कि लोग जाके उसमें बात कर सकते हैं। मतलब अगर कैफे में जाके लोग स्टार्टअप के बारे में बात कर सकते हैं, ऐसे मंदिर बनाओ विच विल इनकरेज द स्टार्टअप। एंड उसका एक रिलेटेड कोई मॉडर्न कॉन्टेक्चुअल कहानी होगा कि ऐसा कोई बंदा था जिसने बड़ा काम किया है अपना। जैसे बंगाल में होता है अपना जो चांद सौदागर जो थे, जो लोकल सांप का देवी है, मनसा देवी। मोनसा इज अ लोकल डेटी। इसका आई थिंक शी वाज क्रिएटेड एंड कॉन्सीव्ड इन द मेडिएवल एरा। और रीजन क्या था कि चांद सौदागर एक बिजनेसमैन था जो देवी का पूजा नहीं करता था, तो उसके बेटे को काट लिया। ऐसे एक जनश्रुति क्रिएट करो। मैं बोल नहीं रहा हूँ कि मिथ्या जनश्रुति क्रिएट करो, कोई बंदे को बनाओ कि भाई ये एक बंदा था, स्पिरिचुअल बंदा था, उसने अच्छा काम किया है। ठीक है, स्टीव जॉब्स हो सकता है फॉर एग्जांपल। ऐसे लोगों को उपासक बना के तुम ऐसे मंदिर बनाओ। वहाँ पे यू एनकरेज द exchange of ideas on information, right? And quantum information and anything else. Yes, that is, I mean, I want to perceive the modern urban Hinduism that way. I'm not asking कि you have to denounce the old gods. I'm saying कि old god तो रहेंगे। अगर कोई कॉस्मिक टाइम का कोई गॉड है जिसे महाकाल कहते हैं, अगर कोई काली है विच इज बियॉन्ड द कॉस्मिक टाइम, तो उस हिसाब से लोकल इंफॉर्मेशन का हो जाए, बिजनेस का हो जाए, मास प्रोडक्शन का हो जाए, उनका भी भगवान हमें कंसीव कर सकते हैं. इट इज नॉट प्रोहिबिटेड इन आवर स्क्रिप्चर. तो and yeah, don't rather than promoting it through scriptures, we have to promote it by creating temples. लोकल जो हिंदू इंजीनियर है, जो काम कर रहे हैं हमारे तुम्हारे जैसे, जो अलग अलग फाइनेंस में, आईटी में काम कर रहे हैं, बनाओ, सब खर्चा करके एक टेम्पल बनाओ और वहाँ पे, वहाँ से स्टार्टअप क्रिएट करो, वो टेम्पल अपने आप फेमस हो जाएगा.
हाँ, मतलब मुझे थोड़ा एक अतरंगी आइडिया आ रहा था कि सॉफ्टवेयर का गॉड हो सकता है क्या? जैसे अभी सॉफ्टवेयर बहुत ज़्यादा है, तो हर व्यक्ति के लाइफ में सॉफ्टवेयर बिना काम नहीं चलता है, तो सॉफ्टवेयर का गॉड होता है क्या? और
अरे
होगा तो
कुंभ
क्या
के
होगा?
मेले में अगर एम्बेसडर बाबा आ सकते हैं और अलग अलग बाबा आ सकते हैं, दे आर ट्राइंग ना, दे आर ट्राइंग इन देयर ओन वे, those babas, their own novel way of understanding, and they are getting it right. ठीक है, no matter how
आई
weird it
थिंक
sounds, if you create a software devta, it will capture immediately the attention of, I'm telling you, if you create that now, it will immediately capture the attention of the, at least the west coast of USA. ठीक है. सम ऑफ द पीपल लाइक इक्विवेलेंट टू स्टीव जॉब्स और उनका जो स्टार्टअप है, वो यहाँ आ जाएंगे कि हाँ यार, मुझे स्पिरिचुअलिटी भी चाहिए और यहाँ शायद कुछ मिल रहा है, तो जाके देखते हैं. आई एम विथ यू ऑन दिस.
Okay, so I think we are out of time for today. So Bijita, I'll request you to share your final comments, and then I will share mine, and then we will wind up this podcast for today.
हाँ, my final comment is, yeah, I want to keep it in the context of Abhay's question, कि मॉडर्न अर्बन हिंदुइज्म इस तरह से हमें कॉन्सीव करना होगा, आइदर बाय क्रिएटिंग न्यू गॉड्स, एंड उसके लिए स्क्रिप्चर से ज़्यादा कर्म इम्पोर्टेंट, मतलब कर्म भी स्क्रिप्चर में भी दिखता है, झलकता है, बट वन इम्पॉर्टेंट वे टू स्प्रेड आवर quote unquote Hindu religion is by creating good, मतलब nice big temples, जो हमें चाहिए, मतलब in the urban cityscape we don't have many temples, we don't have much land allotted for temples. और अगर मॉडर्न सिटीस्केप में अगर टेम्पल अभी क्रिएट करना है, तो उसे मॉडर्न तरीके से सोचो, उस तरह के टेम्पल बनाओ जहाँ पे एक बच्चा जो कोड लिखता है 9 साल का, वो जाके अपना सोलेस ढूंढ पाए. उसको बाद में शिव जी समझ में आ जाएगा या काली समझ में आ जाएगा ऐसे, बट उससे पहले अगर उसे इमीडिएटली कोई गॉड चाहिए, तो ऐसे ही गॉड बनाओ, सॉफ्टवेयर देवता बनाओ, कोई दिक्कत नहीं. यही मेरा फाइनल वर्ड है.
So basically, your point is, as I understood, that connect modern occupations and modern way of life with the eternal understanding of spirituality we have. मैं तो ऐसे ही
राइट.
समझ रहा.
हाँ, एक कॉन्टेक्चुअल स्पिरिचुअलिटी हो सकता है, एक इटर्नल स्पिरिचुअलिटी हो सकता है. सी, वी हैव टू क्रिएट language for spirituality in which modern men and women can converse, right? I mean, have
Yeah.
conversation. So that is important for contextual spirituality, for modern spirituality. Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Bijita. I will take this one question. So, Bhupenda, kindly please tell Dr. Bijit to actually explain stuff. He's reading in layman's terms a bit so that we can relate to him. Else, it becomes okay. See, this is the first episode where we are actually thrashing out the ideas. Okay, so this
Right.
will be little bit vague, little bit academic in few terms. So don't worry about it. We're going to have multiple episodes where we're going to actually club together these concepts and then elaborate and thrash out in regional language for people to actually understand so they can do some tangible steps therein. So don't worry about it. We will be doing that. It is just the first episode, so we actually conceived this 4 days ago. So we also not that prepared, but we tried our best to actually make sure that it becomes a little bit more available to everybody. But don't worry about it. We will be working on that. And the final words. So the final word that I would like to share is that there are 2 points. One is that you mentioned in your talk regarding the British took over our temples when they got to know that the 1857 mutiny was taking place with the help of temples passing messages to each other. Okay. Even I did not know about it. Maybe I knew, but didn't actually understand it in this context. If people actually, correct, there is a propaganda, there is a kind of narrative that what's the worth of a temple? You go there, do puja, and see a deity and come back. What's the utility of a temple? So this kind of information, where temple was a kind of a communication center to actually, so if there was no temples, we did not had actually 1857 mutiny itself. It would not have been there without a temple. So that kind of information needs to be discussed in various platforms, wrote about it. We need to discuss it, we need to disseminate it, so that this kind of information which actually relates to it. So that is something which, and second is regarding ecosystem. So actually, let me show you few things. Let me just share my screen. So nothing is happening is kind of a narrative itself. Okay, we have enough things, but we are not able to maximize our ability, like temples itself. Temples. So let me just show you something which actually. Okay. So hope is the screen visible? Let me just check anyway. Is the screen visible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on. I think the sharing has some issues. Let me just again check it. There are actually multiple tabs open, so it's creating a little bit of issues. Okay. Yeah, I have it now. Okay. So if you see here, this is Sangam Talks. Sorry, you trust. Okay. So Mr. Rahul Diwan. Okay, he is a well-known activist. Okay. He comes at Sangam Talks multiple times. He is creating 1,000 crore Hindutva fund, and that might look very silly. We have 3 lakh crores, 1 lakh crore rupees being generated by the temples, and we are talking about 1,000 crore Hindu fund. Why is that? Right now, you don't have that political will, okay, nor you have the intellectual will or the ability to actually do something about it. So what you do is you start with 1,000 crores, and it will work and it will grow, and you will not know that it has grown into 1 lakh crore in next 5 years. Okay, it can also happen, but this fallacy, the logical fallacy of not doing something, because only when the Hindu temples are under our control, we will do something about it. That has to be like foregone. If you cannot, right now, we cannot reclaim our temples, go and start your own fund. That is a process where the end result is you will have your temples back. But you cannot sit back and do nothing and wait for the temples to be reclaimed. So that I wanted to actually let people know that, okay, it is happening. It is not visible to us. We don't look for it. And because of the ecosystem, it doesn't get amplified the way other things does. The propaganda negative gets amplified. The positive is not amplified. So this is my way of actually just putting it across to whoever watching this, that things are happening. It is not what we want, but it will come there once we all put in our effort into this. And last part is Hindu Jan Jagrati Samiti. This is hindujagrati.org. So they are now building a cohesive, powerful movement to actually free the temples and many other Hindu causes. So these are the two organizations, Sangam Talks, You Trust, and the Hindu Jagrati Samiti. They are actually forefront of fighting the war. So if you can't do anything, just support them. That will all be good enough for people like us who are doing our jobs. Just go and support them, retweet their post itself, retweet their account. That will be also like a contribution of you to the cause itself.
Right.
Yeah. So that was my finishing comment. So thank you, Abhay, and thank you, Bijit, for this wonderful session.
Thank,
Actually, I learned a
thank you,
lot.
Dada.
Thanks. Thanks, Abhay.
Yeah, yeah. So Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram.
Jai Shri Ram. Vande
Jai
Mataram.
Shri Ram. Just a small comment.
Sure,
Go
sure.
ahead.
Uh, uh, that is, I think most of us have idea of IT industry. Most of us have worked there. So my point is here, IT industry is one of the most degenerate industries that I've seen when it comes to the way of life, like corporate parties and all of that, people committing adultery and infidelity. It's one of the most degenerate spaces that I've seen. uh, the way to revive dharma, in my view, is reviving the sacred in everything that exists. Our
Right.
idea of sacred has been omnipresent, whether it's in family, whether it's in our profession. I think that should be our goal. And those are my last comments. Uh, have a
Sure,
good
sure, sure,
night. Have a good sleep.
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Abhay.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.